Welcome to another broadcast of the North Carolina Masonic Research Society. Tonight we are thrilled to have back Worshipful Brother Steve Barrell, past master of Mosaic Lodge 762 in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and sitting master of State College Lodge number 770 here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Steve spoke to us about Cleopatra's Needle in Central Park last time, and this time logic and the paranormal. For those of you that don't know, Steve was talking about that a little earlier before we went live. He is a paranormal investigator and works with the Rhine Research Center in Durham, North Carolina. Rhine used to be affiliated with Duke University, but he has a tremendous metaphysical library in a cellar below his building he has in Durham. Just incredible volumes of books and knowledge. So if there's anyone that knows about these topics paranormal wise, it's Steve. And he has really opened my eyes to a lot of things, debunked a lot of the television ghost hunters, things like that. And I think, Steve, would you agree that Zoom is the modern version of ghost hunting? Steve, can you hear us? Steve,
yes,
there, make a noise.
I have no idea what you mean by that.
Well, Steve, thank you for being here. I'm really looking forward to this presentation. I've seen it before, but I'm dying to see it again. Well, not dying, bad choice of words. Yeah. But Steve, it's all yours.
Well, this is a different presentation. The title, Logic and the Paranormal. I want to be very clear about this. This presentation is about logic, how logic can be used, how it can be ignored, and how it can be abused. Now, the vehicle is that we will be using and using logic on is the controversial topic of paranormal phenomena, specifically the phenomena that suggests that perhaps we do not die. In other words, if evidence shows that our mind, our consciousness or spirit is not produced by the brain, the consciousness comes from somewhere else, and the brain is, for instance, like the receiver of a radio, whereas the transmission is elsewhere. And if that can be shown, then it stands to reason that when the body dies, the mind or the personality survives. And so, but we're going to be looking at logic, at ways to look at that information that has been acquired through a great deal of research and a lot of very interesting personal experiences. So Freemasons monitor Web 1797, and you see there, of course, the 7 steps, and there's logic right there on the 3rd step of the liberal arts and sciences. And in my opinion, logic is the most important of these steps. It is the powerful and necessary tool by which issues can be analyzed, agreement can be reached, and wise decisions can be made. And sadly, it is a skill that I found, particularly most recently, is terribly lacking and even abused within society today. And I think that the reason, as you will see through some of the information I'll be providing, the reason that logic is so often ignored or abused is because it has the potential of presenting inconvenient truths. If people hold a certain opinion on something, they really don't want someone to come in and show evidence and logic and reasoning that show them that their beliefs, that strongly held beliefs, are not correct. And so, for instance, if I owned a coal company, then I would be resentful of scientists who come in and say that my fossil fuels are causing the climate change, and because that's going to cost me money. So I'm going to do everything I can to try to find another version of this argument. So as we look at logic, and this is right out of Webb, and it is a really good description of logic. And so I'd like to pull it apart a little bit. Logic teaches us to guide our reasons discretionally in the general knowledge of things. Now, the word discretionally is a rather archaic word, and I looked it up, and it means the power or ability to discern what is responsible or socially appropriate. So this means that logic actually requires us to be responsible. As we continue here, it directs our inquiries after truth. We're in search of truth. So logic is the means by which we can arrive at truth. It consists of a regular train of argument. I'll get back to this word train in a little bit. Whence we infer, deduce, and conclude according to certain premises laid down, admitted, or granted. Inference is one way to make conclusions or to arrive at certain truths. I infer, for instance, that every day, as far as I know, sometime around 5, 6, 7 a.m., the sun seems to rise in the east. So I can infer that that will happen again tomorrow. Now, deduce is a different kind of reasoning. Deductive reasoning, it begins with known information. So, for instance, if I were to say, all men are mortal, and then another bit of known information, Harold is a man, then I can deduce then that Harold is mortal. It's similar to A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. Now, in science, if it were to turn out that all men are immortal, then we would revise that entire context. And that is how science works. It doesn't prove anything. It only builds on what is accepted to be known based on evidence and data. And so we use these abilities to come to certain conclusions. And when we talk about things that are laid down, admitted, or granted, this means that there's always a starting point, a common ground in which we begin. So if I think about, for instance, this talk, I'm going to ask you to accept that all the evidence that I will be showing you today for these different phenomena are well documented by reputable people. They're not fraudulent. The reporting of these phenomena is not skewed or mistaken. The memories are not failing. There is no attempt at anything other than reporting something that is true. And so that would be the premises in which are laid down and granted here. And so as we continue in this definition, in it are employed the faculties of conceiving, judging, reasoning, and disposing. Conceiving means to understand what is being talked about, to be able to visualize it. Judging means to be able to recognize when something is valid or invalid. So if someone says something that's invalid in the course of making an argument, you would want them to stop, justify what they've said, or say, I can't accept that. It's wrong because such and such. Reasoning is the ability to follow each step in an argument. And an argument is not yelling at each other. An argument is a line of reasoning. And then finally, disposing, which means to make decisions on those, whatever information is arrived at as a result of the process. And all this is naturally led from one gradation to another. So I want to go back to that word train. The idea of one gradation to another is that each level you're reaching to a higher place that's closer to truth. And earlier he used the word a regular train of argument, and I rather like the analogy of say, a railroad train. So let's say the engine is where you're beginning. And let's say the lodge is discussing, we have $1,000 for charity. Who are we going to give it to? And the caboose would be where we write the check and fill in those who will receive the money. So we have to go through a discussion about, well, why should this charity get this? What are the advantages of that one? Who needs it more? Is there a matching grant here that isn't there that would make our money go farther, and so on? And each one of those is like a railroad car, and you follow the succession from the beginning to the end. And so the end point is till the point in question is finally determined. There's an incredible amount in this paragraph, but I've summed it up here. Logic is a regular train of argument that directs our inquiries after truth until the point in question is finally determined. So we have these are the three liberal arts: grammar, logic, and rhetoric, which I think ought to be in that sequence. And if we look at logic, the description of it says understanding how the facts fit together, the what and why. So you would think,
Steve, I apologize, I don't mean to interrupt. Are you supposed to be sharing your screen right now?
Yes, do you not see it?
No, you might want to reshare that.
Oh gosh, okay.
So I didn't mean to cut you off. I just didn't want you to get too far down that road.
Yeah, well, I'm actually I'm pretty far down the road. So let's see, share screen. Well, I'll just through the images so that you can, you'll see what was there. So you've seen this one, my wonderful opening. Ta-da! And this is from Webb's Freemasons Monitor Illustrations of Freemasonry. And this is the paragraph about logic that I just finished describing and summed up with this one phrase: logic, a regular train of argument that directs our inquiries after truth until the point in question is finally determined. So you would think that everybody would be willing to use logic, to have these abilities in order to arrive at the best solutions and such. This screen is the trivium, and particularly the logic, where it says there, what we're looking at is how the facts fit together, the what and why. But unfortunately, not everybody is objective. In fact, most people aren't. Even people who you would expect would be. So let me give you, this is from David Ray Griffin, philosopher. How people choose what they are willing to believe. His first group, he calls them the paradigmatic thinkers, gives them the name the rationalists. They stay within the box. There's a paradigm. So their worldview and opinions are based a priori, which means right from the outset, on what is or is not possible or acceptable. And they tend to be very comfortable within that box. They stay within the box, and there's no amount of opposing data or evidence that will change their minds. So they rationalize. They're called the rationalists because they will find a way to make things so that whatever that paradigm is that they love, whether it's science or a specific kind of religion or a nationality or whatever, they can rationalize so that they're comfortable being there as kind of like sheep going with the herd. And these are very large herds when it's a paradigm. The next group are the data-driven thinkers. These are empiricists. And he uses the phrase, the scientists there, to describe them. And whatever is possible in their world is based on whatever is actual, whatever can be shown by data. Now, we'll get back to that aspect about the scientist in quote in a moment. And the third group are the wishful and fearful thinkers. They tend to be believers, and belief, you should recognize, is what you do when you don't have facts, because there's a difference between believing and knowing. And they tend to be blinded by emotion to keep or maintain a particular viewpoint, regardless of what the data says. And there was a wonderful example of that from a US senator. There was a live demonstration in order to show them why they should continue funding the psychic spies program that was being run originally out of Stanford Research, SRI. And a remote viewer did the most amazing feat of remote viewing. That's a form of clairvoyance, a demonstration that was so uncanny that the senator got up and said, "This is the kind of thing I wouldn't believe even if it weren't true." In other words, he's seen it, he knows it's true, and he refuses to believe it. So he was very, of course, quite fearful about what he had seen. So let's look at how facts fit together, because that was, after all, the point of logic, to see the what and the why. So when we analyze data, facts, and we say data, we're assuming this is objective data. The people who gathered it didn't have any biases or predispositions. It is a fair representation of whatever is going on. But if the topic is controversial, you would think that logic would be applied uniformly, but it is not. It is applied differently by different factions. So for instance, we'll take the paranormal evidence that suggests that we survive death. Now think about, what if that were true? What if we could show that were true? And the fact is that that is quite threatening, because it would require an entire overhaul of worldviews in science, which says that only matter and energy exist. Consciousness does not exist. The mind is only an epiphenomenon. When you have a brain and it's working, you think you have a mind, but that's just what a brain does. It thinks and it produces thoughts. Most religions would need to be overhauled because they're quite immersed in certain doctrines and dogma, and some of them could be very upset by the evidence that the moment that your body dies, you're now free to wander about the plane and you can still function and know what's going on and things like that. And it would also require a real revision in our morals and ethics, because I'll use an inference. If we don't die, then I will infer that we must be here for a reason. And if we are here for a reason, I will infer that what we do actually matters. If we look at science as a mainstream science, which says there really isn't anything, we living people, beings, are just here by accident, then nothing really matters. Once you're dead, you're dead. So the idea of whoever has the most toys at the end wins is not unthinkable. And in fact, the only reason that we don't blow each other up is because we've agreed, I won't do this to you if you don't do it to me. But there's no higher purpose or reason to that. But if it turns out that we do survive death, then our morals and ethics change considerably. So let's look at science. Science is the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. A lot of what science does is it explains the causes for things. When rocks fall out of the sky, it wasn't until the early 19th century that scientists finally conceded that meteor showers or meteorite showers exist and rocks do fall out of the sky. It wasn't until the middle of the 19th century that scientists conceded that there are microorganisms which can invade the body and cause illness and death. So how does science respond to paranormal phenomena? You would think, well, all of these amazing abilities that the human mind seems to possess in very small amounts with only certain individuals, you would think that they would be very curious. And in fact, in the early days, William Crookes, who will come up a little bit later, he was so fascinated by two individuals who could create an entire other physical being in his presence. Yes, you heard that right. That he was looking at other force fields that may not have been yet discovered. He wasn't interested in death or survival. He was interested as a scientist in what we could learn about forces. How can a person levitate, for instance? What force would allow that? So how has science responded to paranormal phenomena? Well, they respond first with denial. These things don't happen. In logic, this is called the a priori argument fallacy. And it basically says that if you start out with a fixed dogmatic viewpoint, then, and you stick to that, it is actually a fallacy because it doesn't leave any room for any kind of a discussion or insights. Another one is circular reasoning. I've often heard, well, it's impossible, so therefore it can't be happening. Well, you're actually saying the same thing twice. You're saying it's impossible because it's impossible, or it can't happen because it can't happen. So there's no reasoning there. Now, the nature of fallacies is that they are actually deceptively, they look like arguments, they sound like arguments, but they're actually junk cognition. And by that, I mean, they appear to be authoritative, but they have defects that actually weaken the arguments rather than strengthening them. And when your argument gets weakened by using a fallacy, it basically says that you're not able to launch a proper argument. And so that's actually rather embarrassing. And this is one of the reasons I like to study logic, is because it's kind of fun to cut someone off at the knees, particularly if you don't like what they're saying. So another fallacy in the denial category is the proof-seeking fallacy. You've heard the expression, I'm sure, extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. Well, if these things are happening, the evidence is happening, rather than science saying, well, you have to substantiate these claims and the evidence, science should get in there and look at the phenomena. That's what science is supposed to do, rather than putting the onus of the responsibility on the people who are having the experiences or maybe not as well equipped to look at it. Another thing science does is to discredit those who have these experiences and those who study them. The ones who have the experience are psycho nut jobs. And those who study them, they call them pseudoscientists. Now, the ad hominem fallacy is essentially, it's like shooting the messenger. If you don't like the message, then just say something bad about the messenger. So the idea here is, since these phenomena can't be happening because they're impossible, anyone who's studying them and saying that they're happening can't be a real scientist. So they're building on their a priori argument with an ad hominem fallacy by calling them pseudoscientists. But the people who called these parapsychologists pseudoscientists are actually pseudo-skeptics. They'll say they are skeptical, but they're not really, because they're not open to looking at the data. They are only interested in showing that the data are wrong, or cherry picking the instances where the data don't seem to carry the argument. Third technique that science is using is called delay. One day we will be able to explain how the brain works. So they say we will understand ESP one day when we understand how the brain works. A little bit of a problem there is at the same time they're saying ESP doesn't exist. It's sort of like someone saying, my tax returns in the news are fake news, but then wanting to know how the people who released the tax returns got a hold of the information. You can't have it both ways. But they're saying, so one day we will explain it. And this we call promissory materialism. Materialism is the idea that there's nothing except matter and energy. There's nothing else. There's no consciousness. So they're making a commitment, a promise into the future. And that's actually a fallacy that might be called the appeal to authority. Appeal to authority is to say, well, they're obviously the experts, so they must be right. Well, just because someone is an expert doesn't mean they are always right. And in this case, those who are doing the appealing to authority are actually the scientists themselves. They're appealing to their own authority. And so what this all comes down to is that there is reductionist materialism that governs science, that is a dogmatic religion. It has not conducted any experiments, refuses to look at the data, because these things can't possibly be happening in the first place. So what they are expressing is an opinion that is based on no evidence, no science at all. It's just an opinion, and in that sense, it is an uninformed opinion. Unfortunately, science carries so much weight in the world today that is the reason that if you look at Wikipedia, for instance, and look at any paranormal topic, instead of seeing a paragraph toward the bottom that says what the arguments are against this, you will see it completely permeated and infiltrated with pseudo and quasi and ostensible and purported and all of these words. And you'll even see sentences 2 and 3 in that just say, but nobody believes this stuff, which is not the way that even Wikipedia ought to work. So now let's look at the paranormal and see what we're talking about. We're talking about events or phenomena that go beyond the scope of scientific understanding. Science's job is to explain causes. Anything that occurs without a cause, where they cannot figure out what the cause is, they deem it as paranormal and they sideline it. Since they can't find the cause, okay, well, it really couldn't be happening because it just doesn't fit into our paradigm. Now, ESP is very well documented, has been studied extensively in double-blind, controlled scientific experiments and studies and methods, statistically analyzed to the point where clearly something is going on. People are getting information without using the normal 5 senses. We don't know how. So this is the area of parapsychology that studies the scientific study of extraordinary mental abilities. So there's ESP, which in fact the word or the phrase was actually coined here in Durham. And the idea is that you are able to acquire knowledge without using your normal 5 senses. And there are 3 categories of it. Clairvoyance, which means to be able to, and I'll go into these a little bit more in a moment. Clairvoyance is essentially knowing something over distance or something that you cannot see or hear. It exists, but it's not within your periphery that you can use your 5 senses to know about it. Precognition is the same thing, except that the spacing between you and the information is not distance, but time. So it hasn't happened yet. Or the opposite of precognition, retrocognition, is it happened long ago, but a person is still able to perceive it. And the third area is telepathy, and that's where 2 minds, 2 people are able to somehow exchange thoughts, or one can get thoughts from another. The second area is called psychokinesis, and it's the mind's ability to affect matter. And it affects matter at a distance. In Newtonian physics, an object in motion will stay in motion until either another object affects it or a force affects it. But we're finding in psychokinesis that people's intentions can affect matter on the large, say, visible scale as well as a micro scale. And we'll be looking at that in a moment. And then the last area, and this is the one we're most interested in today, are called survival studies. This cannot be studied and analyzed in a laboratory because these are what are called spontaneous cases. If you have a near-death experience and you leave your body because you've had a heart attack and they declare you dead, and 10 minutes later you come back and you talk about everything that you experienced and saw the resuscitation and all that. That would be, obviously, it wouldn't have been possible to set that up or ethical to set it up in a laboratory. So the areas we look at here suggest that we survive death. Apparitions and ghosts. Mediumship, which is a person's ability to perceive information about a deceased person, usually for the benefit of someone who knows that person. So letting you know your mother wants you to know this, this, and that. We'll be looking at that. Reincarnation, the idea that if your consciousness or personality left a body in the past and continued, it could come back and get a new one. It's like I owned a car once. I bought it, it was brand new, and by the time I got done with it, it was a jalopy. I left it at the junkyard, and I got a new one. Next area is near-death and out-of-body experiences. These are where people have temporarily left their bodies. They've gone somewhere, or they may just be hovering above, but they're seeing things from a very different perspective. And the last area, which is the one that parapsychology really doesn't want to talk about, is possession. I'm quite interested in it, but honestly, it creeps most people out. And so these areas, for us to look at logic and how some of these phenomena are happening, what we want to look at is what are the possible explanations? And can we figure out from those explanations, is there any way that we can say, this is pretty sure evidence that we don't die, versus another explanation that doesn't allow for that? So the areas we're going to be looking at: clairvoyance, telepathy, and psychokinesis. We need to understand those three in order to look at the survival studies we're going to look at now are apparitions and ghosts, mediumship, and possession. I want to be very clear. Even though parapsychologists study these things, they do not agree on the survival hypothesis. There's a lot of disagreement. And part of it is because they have come up with a theory that works around every other possibility. We'll get to that in a moment. But the other reason that parapsychologists have a lot of problem with survival studies is because they're already branded as pseudoscientists. And if they start walking around saying, well, we're pretty sure that we don't die, and they don't have an experiment that can prove it, the way they do have experiments in ESP and psychokinesis, the fact that they can't prove that would make them even look less reputable than they already do. So to some extent, they're protecting their reputations. So these areas are the ones that we're going to be looking at. Clairvoyance, or remote viewing. Here's an example. That's a person, and their mind, they're going to try to use the power of the mind to get information. Could be anything, anywhere, and I used the brick wall to show that they're really isolated away from it. They could be sitting in a quiet room. And let's say a computer uses a random number generator and decides that that object is the object that the person should try to describe. So they're just told, tell us what we need to know, or maybe the computer cranks out a random number and says, okay, this number will ostensibly connect you with the object that we want you to describe. Now go and describe it. So at first it's blank, they get quiet, and they start getting little bits of information, and they start describing, or enough details. They may not say it's a treasure chest full of gold coins, but they'll say, you know, I see some wood, it's rectangular, it's sort of round at the top. You know, I hear the sound of money, things like that. So the question then is, how are they doing this? This is where we're going to start thinking about the logic, because philosophy tries to figure out how these things happen. Did the person's mind leave their body and go to the object in order to observe it? Because obviously if they're sitting locked in a little room, there's no way that they should have been able to do what they did. Here's another possibility. Did the mind go into the future? Because at the end of this, somebody's going to show them what it was they were supposed to see. Did they go into the future, say 15 minutes into the future, to get the answer? This, when I say they went, it's their consciousness that did this. And then they come back to the present in order to describe it, because now their subconscious has seen it. These are all possibilities. Now, we can't we can try to figure out ways to determine which one may or may not be happening, but you're going to see how difficult that is, which is the reason that survival is so challenging. So here's a real life example. I was at a conference and we were told to let our hands draw whatever it felt like drawing. Don't direct it. And we were given this 8-digit alphanumeric number, and that is connecting us to an image that's in a computer. So I let my hand draw, and I ended up with a diagonal line and a circle which felt like it should have a cartwheel in it and some zigzag at the bottom. At that point, the person who was doing the experiment, who was one of the original remote viewers for the US government, he's was an Air Force captain, has now got a PhD in philosophy and teaches this. He then told us that his random event generator in the computer is going to produce a random number that is going to choose the photograph out of 30,000 in his computer. So in other words, we were describing an image, not only that we could not see, but had not yet been chosen. And here's the image that came up. I blurted out something that began with holy, which attracted his attention. He came over and he saw the drawing and he asked if he could keep it. So as you can see, the diagonal line and the street here and the circle with the wheel is this. Now, I thought this was, the zigzag may have been the trees, but someone pointed out to me in one of these presentations that the building has zigzags all around it. So if we think about this, how could this have happened? Now, this is what a philosopher is going to do. They will say, yes, it did happen. They will determine the probability of this being a lucky guess. And I think those of you who are here looking at this will agree that that probability is probably small, given the very similitudes of my drawing and the object. So one way they might ask how this happened would be that I am precognitive. Precognitive means that I got the information from the future. Tremendous problem with that philosophically, because everything in the universe is thought to happen in terms of cause and effect. The effect would be the image. And so I would draw the image. I'm sorry, the image of the building is the cause, and the effect is my viewing it. But here, the cause hasn't yet been determined. You can't have effect before cause. So the philosophers, there's a whole book and a whole series on precognition, because it is really twisting your mind around trying to figure out how it works. But here's a possibility that gets rid of precognition. My subconscious somehow went to the computer, and somewhere in the computer was able to perceive this image. Then it came back and I drew the image, and then my psychokinesis affected the random number generator in the computer to make sure that it pulled up the image that I had viewed. Now that is philosophically entirely possible, but the problem with it is that it's so much more complicated than the possibility that I saw the image precognitively. The easy solution would be precognition, but then the problem there is, but how does effect happen before cause? So this is how philosophers work with these things. So let's look at the next topic, which is telepathy. Telepathy is a connection between minds. So let's say there's a person, you see the brain there it's actually a cartoon bubble, but it looked like a brain. and wants to connect with another person, and somehow they get information one to another. The best experiments we have in ESP are telepathy experiments. Statistically, the probability of this being lucky guessing with so many tests and so many people is off the charts. It cannot be just lucky guesses and chances. So this will come up in a little bit. So it's a mind-to-mind connection, like mind reading. The next one is psychokinesis. Now, if you do not know the double slit experiment, then you need to know it. Everybody should know the double slit experiment. Very briefly, scientists wanted to know if electrons are waves, like light is a wave as energy, or if electrons are particles like bullets. So waves could move in any kind of direction, but a bullet is going to go in a straight line. So they set up an experiment, and they determined that the electrons function as waves. In other words, as energy rather than particles. But it happened that this happened only when they were not watching the experiment. As soon as there was an observer, the electrons were particles. And no matter what they did, any effort to observe the experiment while it was happening caused the electrons to become like particles, like bullets going in a straight line. And whenever they were not watching or observing the experiment, the electrons were waves. And what this suggests is that there's no such thing as a passive observer. Our consciousness actually may even be creating everything that we see, if everything is existing in waves, except our experience of it is as particles. And that's really mind-blowing. And there's no question about this. So that could be an example of psychokinesis. Now let's look at a couple of other examples. This is a video, you'll hear about it. This is a lady in Russia in the 1960s. She's not the only one who could do this, but she could cause objects to move by intention.
This rare talent for moving objects by force of will alone has been termed psychokinesis, or PK. Ninel Kulagina is a Russian housewife who has this ability. These films of her demonstrating PK were made in a Russian hotel room and smuggled out of the country by American researchers. She gets the object moving with gestures of her hands or by fixating the object with nothing more than her eyes. Kulagina has been studied intensively for more than 10 years by Professor Sergeyev of Leningrad University, who has reported on her work. These films and demonstrations are subjects of unending controversy. Is she a sensitive or a charlatan?
So it's important to mention that she's not the only one who's been able to do this. And it always, when you get just one person who does something, you really think they're fraudulent. But when you start finding a reasonable number of people who can do them, then you start asking yourself, well, there's something else is going on here. This can't be fraud. So another example is a study of psychokinesis. This is J.B. Rhine here in Durham at the Parapsychology Laboratory. They studied dice that were falling, and the goal was that the person who is the test subject should try to make the dice produce as many of one particular number as possible. And so they would keep track. There would be 6 dice, and each time they tumbled it, if they were looking for 5s, they counted how many 5s and the number of tumbles and so on. And the probabilities of this, they did a meta-analysis of 2,700,000 of these 59 experiments, 2,700,000 trials. And the probability of this was outside the standard deviation, which would be chance, at about 2.6. So it wasn't robust, but it was more than weak. Another experiment came later, is this device, that wheel, those are lights, and you can see the bottom one is lit. Inside that is an isotope that produces one particle of radioactive isotope or whatever it is a 50% chance of producing it within 2 seconds. So if it does produce it and it's measured, then the light will move clockwise to the next bulb. And if it doesn't, it will move counterclockwise. Now, the person who's staring at it, their goal is to try to get it to move more than that. You want to get it to, say, go clockwise as much as you can. Now, by chance, since it's exactly 50-50 as to whether in 2 seconds the isotope will be released, the thing stays most of the time pretty static. But this was a way to measure and quantify a person's ability to affect these electronics. So now let's look at apparitions and ghosts. The data for this, these are spontaneous cases, and so it can be hard to identify what's going on. I took this photograph in a house that was extremely active, and there were 3 times where there were in the photographs where there was a dark area in the photograph that should not have been there. The room was well lit, the flash was working, and yet right there in the middle the middle suggests that it could not have been my finger, for instance, dangling over the flash to block some light, or the strap or anything like that. When I have captured shadows in images, they have always been in a series of 3, 4, or 5, so it isn't a one-off. Photographs of ghosts or these kinds of phenomena are extremely rare and very questionable. So every so often, yeah, goosebumps. Oh, you haven't heard anything yet. Ha ha, wait till you hear what's coming up. I hope you'll be able to sleep tonight. So another possibility, let's see. Yes, there's another, which is that sometimes ghosts show up in recordings called electronic voice phenomena. We set up recorders, we go back and listen, and we will hear voices on the recordings that were not audible to us at the time. Here's one captured by my friend Deanna in Greensboro. At 1:30 in the morning, walking through a house that had become a museum. No children in the house. Oops, let's go back there. As I like to say, the little girl who said peekaboo thinks we can't see her because she's hiding. Okay, here's a case, a veridical apparition. Veridical means that information was imparted by the apparition that turned out to be true, that the people could not have known at the time. And there are 2 witnesses. Now, this was the best picture I could find. The actual story, the two men were actually in the Navy. They were in hammocks parallel to one another, and they were asleep. And there they were, and suddenly their father appeared between them. They woke up, saw him standing there. He then took his hand and raised it and pointed to his eyes, which were closed, and then he disappeared. So it turned out that 8 hours later, these 2 brothers found out that their father had died about 8 hours before. So the question here, let's look at this. So how can this happen? So what do we know about this case? Now let's start thinking. I want you to kind of think with me or ahead of me. There are multiple. So what we know that both of them perceived their father, and because he stood between them, they were seeing him from their own perspectives. So for instance, if the father lifted his right hand, that would have been the closer hand to one son and the farther one to the other. So it wasn't like they were seeing a projection, say flat against a wall. We also know that the father pointing to his closed eyes was an indication that he had died. So he was, in other words, he was interactive, conscious, and aware of what he was doing and why. And we know that it was later confirmed that he had died at that time. This is known as a crisis apparition. And if people do experience an apparition only once in their lives, it's very often a crisis apparition. So let's look at the possible explanations. The survivalists, the people who say this is evidence survival, will say that what Dad did was he materialized. He was deceased, but he managed to form enough of a body in that place. And therefore, because he was standing there physically, it woke the sons up. And then he did what he did, and then he could dematerialize the body. And that's one possibility. And materialization, I'll show you some things about that in case you're skeptical about it. There's another explanation, and this says survivalist, but I actually corrected it, and it should say anti-survivalist. The father communicated his image telepathically to both his sons. So his mind, in other words, perhaps he knew he was dying. He hasn't yet been dead. This is anti-survivalist. He hadn't yet died, but he knew he was dying. He communicated mentally to both his sons. And by reaching them in their sleep, which is ostensibly an easier thing to do than getting to someone when they're awake, it caused them to wake up. And then he projected his image so that they could see it. So even though they were looking with their eyes, what they were actually seeing of their father is not there, but is their own image inside their head. We have to remember that everything that we experience is experienced by us in our head. There's actually nothing out there. You're not aware of, for instance, my little toe on my left foot until I talk about it. Now you've experienced it, so now you're aware. So all our reality is really inside our heads. So if telepathically we see something, and this would explain sometimes why some people see a ghost, a physical, an apparition, while others don't. There's another anti-survivalist. And here I need to introduce the concept of super psi. You'll remember before I said that parapsychologists and philosophers have come up with an explanation that overrides everything. It's called super psi. And it basically says that all information is knowable. Perhaps it exists in a cloud somewhere, or exists in all minds. So every person's mind is accessible through telepathy, and so that you can actually know everything. So any explanation as to how things could happen from a survival standpoint, meaning the deceased person is there, is negated by the possibility that whoever's perceiving them is just getting the information from the cloud or from telepathy from other people who have it. And so the anti-survivalists would say, one son either clairvoyantly knew that his father was dying. In other words, while he's asleep, clairvoyantly he's able to see his father and know he's dying, or he telepathically learned this from his father. So he connected so that he became aware that the father was dying or about to die. The son then envisioned his father, telepathically awoke his brother, and then telepathically projected the vision of the dying father to the brother. And because the brother was receiving the information, he made the necessary adjustments in perspective to kind of result in the effect of the father standing there. Now, these two brothers had said nothing to each other until after this happened. So it's not like one said, oh, Dad's standing right there, do you see him, or something like that. So let's look at how the philosophers would tear this apart. I've made everything red that signifies a process. Survivalist 1, Dad materialized. So he's no longer in a physical body, but his conscious being, his mind, was able to create enough of a physical body, or an impression of one, that would awaken his sons because somebody's standing over their bed, essentially. Well, I've just realized I need to plug my computer in because it's running low. I'll be right back. Did you miss me? I'm plugged in. So that first one only required one process. Dad's mind materialized enough of a body for his sons to see and recognize him as being physically there, and then he did what he did. The next one, the anti-survivalist, just before dying, Dad communicates his situation telepathically to both sons, and then once he's connected with them, commands them to wake up, somehow gets them to awaken, and does the gesture, or he telepathically connected to one son, who then telepathically connected and projected it to the other. So you see there are 3 steps there. An anti-survivalist 2. One son clairvoyantly knew or telepathically learned, it's one or the other, about his father's situation, then envisioned his father, telepathically woke up his brother, telepathically projected the clarity of the vision of the father. It's got to be, that's a very powerful telepathic image. And then the brother made the necessary adjustments. So what you're seeing here is that one of these is much simpler than the others. So which seems most likely? Fewer processes, simpler processes, suggests, it's called the law of parsimony, or Occam's razor, which says don't introduce more complicated solutions when a simple one fits. Now, we're making an assumption that it's easier to materialize a body than it is to, say, make 3 or 4 telepathic connections. None of this seems to involve any effort. That's one of the things about this, is that there doesn't seem to be any actual energy involved in any of this. So we can't say that just because one involves only one process and the other involves 3, 4, or 5, that one is easier than another. So in that sense, the law of parsimony may not hold. But this is the one that the philosophers would prefer, or the survivalists would say Dad materialized. And it's probably, it's very debatable, but it's possible. Okay, so I just want to mention about materialization. The idea that a person can create an actual physical body. The nice gentleman in the upper right corner is Sir William Crookes. He was the president of the Royal Society, a chemist, physicist. He invented the vacuum ray tube, spectroscopy, discovered thallium, invented the Crookes tube, which was an early form of a cathode ray tube. He was also a researcher, and he's the one who was looking at some phenomena that physical mediums could do and trying to figure out if there was another force. The man in the upper left corner, his name is Daniel Douglas Hume, spelled H-O-M-E, but pronounced Hume. And he was witness to levitate. There's a drawing of it underneath. And these are scientists from the Royal Society, and a couple of them are lords or titled people in England. And he did levitations regularly, as well as over a 2-year period in Crookes' own library. He materialized, while sitting in a chair, materialized an entire physical being who picked up an accordion and walked around the room playing it and carried on conversations with the other scientists and other people that were in the room. And this was not just once, as he had done more than once. Crookes also had a woman named Florence Cook. Now, she would go into a dead trance, and she would basically be on a sofa passed out behind a curtain in Crookes' library. But out would come the figure that you see in the photographs at the bottom. That figure you see there is a materialized being, and there's Crookes holding her hand. She at one point picked up a phosphorescent lamp and walked around the room while having conversations. Obviously, Crookes was no dummy. He was one of the smartest experimentalists in the world. He won the Nobel Prize in 1907, and he published a book in 1874 about all his experiments with Hume particularly, and mostly psychokinetic experiments. So what I'm saying here is don't write off the phenomena, even if it's really hard to believe it. In fact, he wrote a rebuttal in the book, and I will give you a file at the end of this. I'll put it in the chat for some reading. He wrote a book about these with the testimonies of the other scientists who sat in on them, who said, yes, the things he described are exactly what he did. And then someone accused him of, well, this couldn't possibly have happened because it can't happen. And he wrote and he said, sir, you've just essentially renounced any testimony whatsoever. Because if you don't believe me and you don't believe these colleagues, some of the most brilliant scientists in England, then you're not willing to believe anything from anyone. So that's from materialism and such. So let's go to mediumship. Let's assume the lady on the right is a medium. This means she has the ability to communicate with deceased people. The woman on the left is what we call a sitter. She has come for a reading, and we will hope and expect that she doesn't know anything. The medium doesn't know anything about her. All right, so, but she would really like to hear from Grandma. So they start the session. The medium then says, oh, well, your grandmother is standing here right now, and she's telling me yada, yada, yada. And pretty much all the things that the medium tells the woman are true. So the question is she getting it from Grandma? Is Grandma really there? Because if Grandma's really there, and the data, the information is so accurate that she can't be, these are not lucky guesses. Then if Grandma's really there, there's your evidence from survival. But what do the anti-survivalists say? They say she could be getting it telepathically from the mind of the sitter. The sitter knows Grandma. She knows everything about her. Or she could be getting it from a cloud of all information in which she has chosen to get information about this one person, and somehow, the same as a remote viewer could describe that one treasure chest, she goes with the intention of, show me what I need to know about this woman's grandmother. Or she could be doing both. She could be combining the cloud of all knowing and telepathy, which would mean that Grandma's not there. We don't have the evidence that suggests that the Grandma is still alive. So here's what we know. We know the medium is getting correct, detailed information. So the question is, from where? Dead Grandma. If she's getting it from dead Grandma, that means Grandma is still alive. Is she getting it from the sitter's mind, then it's inconclusive. It doesn't mean that Grandma is not still alive. It just means that we can't determine, if it's easier for the medium to be getting it from telepathy, from the sitter's mind, and doesn't need Grandma, maybe Grandma doesn't know how to communicate very well. So we can't say that just because she's getting it telepathy, that Grandma's not around. And the cloud would still be the same thing, or the combination of all of these. So the question then becomes, if you're a scientist, can you devise an experiment to show that the information is only coming from Grandma? And yes, in a way, there is an experiment, there's an organization in Tucson which separates the sitter from the medium by 5 degrees of separation. If any of you are drug dealers or international spies, you'll know how this works. Essentially, the drug dealer or the spy only knows who they're getting information or drugs from and who they're giving it to. They don't know anything else, because if they get caught, then it's much easier for the authorities to destroy the entire network. So what they've done with the medium experiment is that the sitter describes Grandma, because Grandma comes through really well. She's come through with other mediums. We know Grandma knows her stuff. So she describes Grandma, how she died, what she did, what she enjoyed, all of these things. Hands that to someone. That person hands it to someone else. And what we're trying to do is get rid of telepathy. So maybe I've met the sitter. So maybe I can get a little bit of information from the sitter, but then I'm giving it to someone else. That person mixes in a fake profile of another person. So there are two choices as to who the decedent, the communicator is. They hand it to another person who then gives it to the medium and tells the medium, asks the medium, you have a choice between Joseph and Susan. And the medium will say, well, I'm getting a strong sense of Susan is here. I'm not connecting with Joseph. And then she'll start, okay, how did Susan die? And so there would be these questions. Now, the person who's asking the question doesn't know the answers. The person who, so that they've broken up the telepathy chain. So when they have finished that and they filled out all the forms, they come back to the sitter and other people who look at what the medium said and compare it to the profile of grandma. Now, the sitter can do this on their own, but the other people who do this will not do it with the sitter. So they will have to determine where the match is and they can give a value. For instance, grandma's hair color from blonde to very dark. You'd maybe have a gradation of 5. So if they're getting very close to it, they can give a higher score than if it's completely wrong. So they can quantify it. And they're doing amazing work, but they cannot get rid of the concept of super psi. Maybe the medium is just getting all this from the cloud. So we can minimize telepathy, but there's no way to test for around super psi. You can't test for it. You can't prove it exists. And there's no way to eliminate it. And this is the reason that all the survival studies, nothing can be proven. So let's look at the last. And if you have difficulty sleeping at night, if you're easily scared, you may not want to hear what's coming. Possession. I have the lady now. Okay, let's pretend she's not the medium anymore. She's just a random lady. Possession would imply that a spirit has moved in with her and is interacting or affecting her in some ways. Now, I know that sounds very far-fetched, but it actually isn't. So let me put it this way. First, if you believe that you have a soul or spirit, then at some point in the formation of your body, that soul or spirit was already existing and came and latched on and started learning how to operate the body. So if your soul or spirit did this, then it wouldn't be far-fetched for another one, a random one that doesn't have a body, to do the same thing. In fact, we should ask the question, not how does it happen? We should actually ask, why doesn't it happen more often? What's preventing it? Because there are a lot of deceased people who, if consciousness survives death, they're still around. So we're going to look at the case of possession out of my own files. Well, first we're going to ask this. So let's say another person is talking through this lady's body. Is it that other person? The other person might have different ways and mannerisms. They have a different story, a lifetime. Very often you'll find that that person's lifetime overlapped with the person who is the host, which means they were both alive at the same time. That's one of the ways to remove reincarnation, which should be sequential from the equation. So, but how can the person who is possessed get this information? Well, the anti-survivalists would say, once again, they're getting it from the cloud of all-knowing. So you're now about to hear a conversation with a dead man whose name is George. Unless you don't want to, the debate is getting ready to start. I did this in New York in November 2012. I was there. There was a young man who was an acquaintance of my best friend in Manhattan. And this acquaintance was rather odd. I was telling my best friend about what I've been working on, my certification in hypnosis, and particularly a process called spirit releasement therapy, which detects if a person has others attached to them and helps them to leave. And while I was telling my best friend about this other fellow chimed in and he said, I think I've got that. And I asked why, and there's a list of questions that might help me to determine if in fact he's not always there as himself. And he answered yes to 9 out of 10 of them, including the question about mental arguing. Like, you know that you only have enough money to pay the rent, but there's something you really want to buy, a PlayStation or something like that, and you go through this. He said, yeah, when that happens, it says we. Got my attention. So I took Edwin into another room, and with hypnosis, I got him to basically to go aside, to set himself aside, and asked if anyone would like to speak to me. And this person named George came out. So I'm going to play a recording for you, a snippet of a conversation I had with Edwin, who is from California. Age 17, his family moved from Central America. He knew no English. He finished high school at 19 because he had to learn English. He's now 25 and he's never been on the East Coast. He's visiting New York for the first time. So, and the reason I'm emphasizing this is because George is a dyed-in-the-wool New Yorker. You're going to hear his accent. So I'm going to play Edwin first, speaking.
And well, I was a bartender, but I never drank while I was working.
No, I'm just using this
as an example. Okay.
What happened?
So you don't really hear a New York accent in that. I'll play it once more.
And
well, I was a bartender, but I never drank while I was working.
No, I'm just using this
as an example. Okay.
What happened?
All right. So, for instance, he doesn't say talk. Having grown up in New York, I know how to do these things. So I'm going to begin the conversation that I had with George, just to the point where you can clearly hear that he's a New Yorker. Then I'm going to go back to play a little bit of Edwin again so you can really hear the difference.
Tell me your name.
George.
George. How do you know Edwin?
If you really gotta know, then you don't know, do you?
I don't know, that's why I'm asking you.
I see. Stupid kid didn't tell you.
No, he didn't. Do you want to tell me?
Well, there's a whole bunch of us over here if you want to talk to them.
I'd like just to talk with you now if I can. Is that all right?
Yeah, I saw him down the stairs talking to you.
So you heard him say talk, and there are a couple of other New York things there. So now I'm going to play Edwin again.
A bartender, but I never drank while I was working.
So obviously you don't hear the New York there. So now I'm going to play the 3-minute segment with George. And what I want you to know here at one point, my job with George is to help him understand his situation. Very often they don't know that they have died because they're still observing the world and they don't feel dead. In fact, they're not dead. So in order for me to help him, I have to persuade him that he no longer has a body. I try to do it nice. I don't say, dude, you're dead, because it kind of ruins people's day. So I try to do it in a nice way. And one of the ways that I would do this is to have them look into a mirror and they don't see their own face. Now, I had just read about this technique, and it happened coincidentally that Edwin was sitting in the corner on a beanbag chair next to a mirror. So at a certain point, I tell George, I ask him what he looks like, and he gives me a rough time because he's a New Yorker. Then I ask him to look in the mirror and tell me what you see. And notice what he says and how quickly he says it. And then when I tell him, you don't have a body, you're in somebody else's body, he tapped on the glass as though it was clear glass and asked if Edwin Is he on the other side? In other words, is this a trick? He's just sitting there through a piece of clear glass. And at that point, I told him, now when you hear his initial response to seeing what he saw in the mirror, just ask yourself how clever that would have been just to make that up if he had done so. So here we go.
Tell me your name.
George.
George. How do you know Edwin?
If you really gotta know, then you don't know, do you?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking you.
I see. Stupid kid didn't tell you.
No, he didn't. Do you want to tell me?
Well, there's a whole bunch of us over here if you want to talk to them.
I'd like just to talk with you now if I can. Is that all right?
Yeah, I saw him down the stairs talking to you.
How do you know Edwin?
I don't know him. I just saw him down the stairs talking to you. I saw him staring at me, so I came down.
When did you join him?
I gotta say, 2 hours ago.
All right. George, before you joined him, what is the last thing you remember doing?
I was upstairs staring outside. Which, by the way, someone's about to get towed. Just to let you know.
Thank you for that. So you were upstairs looking outside?
And then I saw him staring at me.
And what were you doing before that?
Before I was staring outside?
Yeah.
Oh, I was sitting on the couch.
George, I've got to tell you some things, and this may be a little difficult for you to hear. Is that all right?
I don't see the problem.
If you look in the mirror, who do you see? When you look in the mirror, do you see your own face?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I don't see why not. It's me.
Describe what you look like.
You're trying to tell me that I can't see me?
If you look in the mirror, if you look to your left, turn your head right now to the left, and look in the mirror and tell me whose face you see there.
The stupid kid looks like he's asleep.
Mm-hmm. Do you know that you are in his body right now?
This is a joke, ain't it? Is he there?
Okay, George, I'm going to tell you some things, and it's really important that you listen, because I want to help you. All right? At some point, George, you died. When we die, our spirits, there's a light, and our spirits are supposed to go into that light and go into a spirit world.
I'm not done yet.
Well, the thing is,
I have to see my grandchild. I'm not done yet.
George, you're hurting Edwin.
I just came to say hello. How the hell am I hurting the stupid kid?
Well, by being in his body, you're affecting his ability to function in his own free will. And I know you're a nice man, and I know you wouldn't want to hurt anyone.
I tell you what, tell the fucking kid to leave me alone, man. Don't call me down here.
I sort of wish I could see your facial expressions right now. So there you have it. Just an incredible amount of information from a Hispanic kid who does not speak with a New York accent. That was a whole conversation with a real person, a very real person. So let's look now at philosophy and logic. The purpose of philosophy is to study the fundamental nature of knowledge, what we know, how we know it, reality, what is reality, and existence. The oldest question for all humanity is, do we exist? And we cannot answer that question. So philosophy, we ask that, can philosophy help us either to verify or dismiss post-mortem survival based on the evidence? Because obviously we've got two teams. We've got the survivalists who say this is evidence of this, and we have the anti-survivalists who say, well, there's this explanation, we can't test it, you can't disprove it. So let's look at some possible explanations for the phenomena. Survival, we don't die. And the anti-survival super psi, which is amazing abilities in psychism. You're going to love this story. This is one of the best cases that where philosophers are really able to dig their teeth in here and get something. Runke's leg. Okay, Runke is a drop-in. Remember, the medium is sitting there, maybe wants to communicate to grandma on behalf of the granddaughter. Well, here's an Icelandic trance medium, a gentleman. Trance medium means he goes into an altered state of consciousness. He may be semi-conscious, he may be passed out, and he allows other spirit beings, loved ones of the people who have come together, allows their loved ones to use his body to speak directly. And so in the period 1937 to 1941, he's doing this. And instead of all the loved ones and the deceased coming through and speaking to them, this guy named Runke comes in. He insists on having a drink, and he wants his leg back. Now, folks, you can't make this stuff up. He wants his leg back, and he is a son of a bitch, this man. He is horrible. He is mean, foul-mouthed, insistent on having a drink, and the medium was a teetotaler. And he was furious and such, and he would just drop in, barge in. But he did this over the course of a few years. It wasn't just once. And so the result of that was they started getting him to talk a lot about his lifetime. His real name was Runolfur Runolfsson. He was tall, alcoholic. He had passed out and drowned at the edge of the shore because he was drunk. Wolves gnawed off one leg, which floated out to sea with the tide, which ebbs and flows twice in 24 hours. And then they found his body and they buried him in a cemetery without his leg. So now he's not happy. He wants his leg back. In the public sitting, after a couple of years of where he would come in and rant, and maybe he was getting a little nicer, but he still wanted drinks he wasn't getting and all this. But this was a public sitting, and so somebody brought a friend. And all of a sudden, Runke, when he's in the medium's body, points to this stranger and says, "You have my leg." So, well, that the fellow who is sitting there bought a house that has a human leg bricked into one of the walls. The man who built the house had found the leg along the water, and this is a considerable distance from where Runke had lost it. Asked around, they couldn't figure out who it might belong to. He got in touch with the church and said, "Well, can we bury it?" And the church said, "We can't bury a leg without a body, and we don't know who it is." And he didn't want to disrespect it, so he was building the house, and so he decided he would just brick it up into the wall, and maybe eventually something would happen. Well, he sold the house to this poor schnook, who's a nice Yiddish word, this schnook who's there at this message service, and all of a sudden the medium, or Runke in the medium, calls and says, "You have my leg." Well, this attracted the attention of researchers, and mediumship was very well developed in Iceland. And so the researchers came. They gathered the facts from the various people who came to these message services about Runke. They then went to police records, church cemetery records, and they were able to confirm the details of the story. Many of the notes were handwritten notes. This happened in the 1880s when Runke had died, and it was 1937 to 1941 when he was coming through. So once they gather, and also one person, they have the documentation that one person who came to hear from, say, grandma, didn't get to hear from grandma at all because Runke dominated the whole session, and this person had written an angry letter to the medium, which is very good documentation to show that these things were actually happening as they were described. And so here it was, Runke died in the 1880s. No one had any living memory of the incident. So what do we make of this case? Was Runke, we'll say the deceased, was he actually present? If he was, this would be very good evidence for survival. But the problem, as you know already, is the super psi. The medium got all the information from the cloud. One question is, why not telepathy? Why didn't the medium get it from telepathy? And the answer there is that nobody there knew Runke, didn't know anything about Runke. So it wasn't like the medium could be getting the information from, say, somebody's granddaughter who's sitting there. And the information was extremely detailed. It was so detailed, and it would have to have come from many, many different places. So the survivalist said that Runke, it was Runke, and he took over the medium to speak. So we have two sides. Is it super psi, the medium got it from the cloud, or was it Runke? And you'd say, okay, it's 50-50, it's inconclusive and a draw. But this is where the philosophers came in. They're looking at the motivations. Because when these things happen, remember the remote viewer who's going to describe the treasure chest is motivated to do that. So here's the motivation of the medium. First, the medium could not have known Runke's situation because it took researchers a considerable amount of effort to figure out where it was that Runke was buried and where he lost the leg and find the scraps of information and all of that and put it together. Medium could not have known all that information. The medium would not benefit from sabotaging these message sessions. The medium was there essentially to have people who probably were paying a small amount to take part to hear from their loved ones. So the medium has no vested interest in sabotaging or ruining these things. And the cloud cannot force itself on the medium. You have to go there with intention to get it. Whereas Runke is extremely motivated. He wants his leg back. And so in this instance, the philosopher said survival. Not only did they say survival, but they also said that to say that super psi had done this is cripplingly complex. And what they mean by that is it's like a bullet that ricochets off 9 surfaces and kills 6 people. It is so complicated for the medium to have gathered information from the cloud, which the medium didn't know anything about, didn't care about Runke. There's no one there who wants to hear from Runke and all of this. And then to gather all bits of information that nobody had in living memory, and which was just bits of scraps of information in various archives and repositories. So in this case, the philosophers were able to say, here's evidence of survival. Now I'm going to share with you part of a 35-minute reading I had with a gentleman I had just met. In fact, you'll hear that he didn't even know my name. I had met him an hour and 20 minutes earlier for a reading, and he had a reading before me, which meant he had 20 minutes of free time before I went in there. And it just happens, for those of you who are Masons, that he's a 33rd degree Mason. In fact, it was he who told me about Masonry being very mystical and that I should get back into it. So this is excerpts. Now, the readings, he might be sitting there going just like this for a minute. So I've excerpted it in order to shorten those silences. You'll hear short silences. That just means things have been, the silences have been taken away. But you'll get a sense of the entire process here.
Okay. Your name is Bill?
Steve.
Oh, why did I think Bill? You know Bill? Okay. Steve. And your last name is?
Barrell, B-A-R-R-E-L-L.
I'm going to ask you to think of 2 or 3 people in spirit around you who've passed on, put their names down there, and then write as many questions as you want. I don't care what the subject matter is on there. You can write on both sides of that card. When you're finished, fold it in half, fold it again, hold it in the palm of your hands. Just don't tell me anything you write on there. Okay. Now I'm going to ask you to take that little card you wrote and put it in my hand and put your hand over top of it. I get this stuff mentally to begin with, so I'm after voice vibration, not content. So if you say to me, well, I saw my house and I get something about a house, at first I don't know whether that's me or spirit. So this way, if you just say it's a beautiful day, it's raining, it's much easier for me. Now, hold that in your hands just for a little bit. And now that you've done all that, just put out your thoughts. I'm here now. What? Don't concentrate on anything. But I just like to do this because I don't want to sit here and feed you. A lot of readings consist of what I call insurance company and statistical information. You can't help that. But I want you to know that we're tuning in with something besides what would fit somebody of your age category, blah, blah. Okay, just put that in my hand and put your hand over top of it. Fold it in half once again if you don't mind. And then again if you want. Just, all right. Now mentally, I'm here, now what? Amen. Say it's a beautiful day to me. The grass is green, just anything for your voice.
It's a beautiful day.
Because you have a lot of spiritual energy around you, but there's something here that I'm feeling chest, but then I'm surrounded with something, and I don't know what this is all about, but I'm sensing smoke. Say it's a beautiful day.
It's a beautiful day.
There's an energy here. Anything about a fire around you anywhere, or anybody in spirit with something with smoke or fire, or say it's a beautiful day.
It's a beautiful day.
I don't know where I'm getting this, but I feel like I want to breathe deeply, and I'm not sure if I breathe deeply that I might just die from this. Say it's a beautiful day again. I feel you.
It's a beautiful day.
Audrey, say it's a beautiful day again.
It's a beautiful day.
There's somebody standing right here.
I can take that name.
Where am I going with this? Do I stay here? Do I stay here? Do I go? Do I stay here? Do I go? Do I stay here? Do I go? There's an energy here and somebody, they're trying to clear the mind. I'm picking something up and I'm putting it down and I'm picking it up. Is your mother still in the living?
Yes.
Say it's a beautiful day.
It's a beautiful day.
Because I'm feeling an energy. I want to talk about your mother. And as I'm feeling this, I feel spirit is kind of pushing me, but then somebody's pulling me back. But I feel there's something going on with her that does she have any illness or anything going on with her right now? Because there's something with her that wants to go and there's something wants to stay. I'm being pulled in two ways here. So, Aubrey. Honey Church, say it's a beautiful day. I got you.
It's a beautiful day.
Touch my hands a minute.
It's a beautiful day.
I got you. There's a John here also that's helping you. There's so many that are coming in here from Spirit that are wanting you to know that they're assisting you and they're trying to get the doors open. I want to finish this thing with your mother first of all, because I feel this Aubrey is very close to your mother, trying to help her, and they want you to not to worry, that she's in good hands, and that when it is her time, they will all be there, and they want you to know that.
So there you heard, he named my grandfather with his full name, with his West Indian accent. It continues.
Yael Skadai. Say it's a beautiful day.
It's a beautiful day.
Somebody's saying Yael Skadai. Come on, English. Someone else is speaking another language here. Say it's a beautiful day.
It's a beautiful day.
All right. Yeah. Van something. Say it's a beautiful day.
It's a beautiful day.
Van. Somebody else here trying to get through. Janice. Say it's a beautiful day.
It's a beautiful day.
And we continue.
There's a name like Karlbach, Raul, Carl, Cole. Say it's a beautiful day.
It's a beautiful day.
Spirit's trying to get me something here. And that's coming over here. I am trying. This John is kind of tormenting me. He keeps telling me, keep trying a little harder. I am trying. Rumpelstiltskin, I don't know. Say it's a beautiful day.
It's a beautiful day.
I feel he's talking about his last name, and I almost want to start making, it sounds like Rumpelstiltskin.
You almost said it before.
Oh, all right, well.
I did.
There's something here. He's not happy with me. All right, so he's trying to get something over here. I'm trying the best I can. Yeah, there was someone who either was hung or garroted around you, too. Say it's a beautiful day.
It's a beautiful day.
I just felt something around my neck.
It's strong.
So once again, I sort of wish I could see your faces now. I'm now good friends with Reed Brown. And when people go to have a reading with him, I often just tell them, make sure you use the restroom before you go in there. So now we're going to think like philosophers. Telepathy, super psi, or survival. Looking at what just happened. How did Reverend Brown get this information? So here's what I did not know when I went in there. I never expected my two European friends to come through, and quite honestly, we were not on speaking terms. So I would never have expected them to come through. My grandfather never used his name Aubrey when he lived in the US because people laughed and said Audrey. So he used his name Walter. I've never heard him say the name Aubrey, nor with the accent Aubrey, which Reed Brown was doing. And I hadn't heard him speak since 1967 when I was 14 when he died. So I don't have a recollection of how he spoke. I also don't know, so I don't know how he would have pronounced Aubrey, except that I played this recording for some relatives who are familiar with the Barbadian accent, and they said, yes, that's how he would say his name. And as far as Rumpelstiltskin goes, it took me 2 months to figure out what it meant. He was so right about everything else that I figured I'm going to figure it out. And about 2 months later, I was walking in front of Whole Foods and I saw Ranunculus for sale. And then I remembered that John's corporation was Ranunculus Incorporated. So, you know, we look for information that the sitter could not have known that suggests that they're not getting it from telepathy from me. So this would be a fairly strong case for survival, much better than what you see on television. So what I want to say to fellow Masons is, you know, the sprig of acacia there, which we refer to as a symbol of belief in immortality. In my opinion, we can get rid of the belief. The evidence is so strong that at this point, you know, immortality is guaranteed. And so I'll leave the talk there. I see it's quite long, and I would be surprised if anybody's still here. I do have just a couple of other things. I could play some recordings of ghosts if you like, but I'll pause for now and just see what everybody wants. Oh, there's a whole bunch of you still here. Okay, stop share. There we are. So if you have questions, unmute yourselves.
Actually, there's a question over here on Facebook. I'll ask real quick. Brother Monica Kenny asked, are clairvoyant and empaths able to receive messages similar to mediums?
They would have to, they might be born with that skill, or they could possibly develop it. I'm always suspicious when somebody says to me, I want to be a medium, because most of the people who I know who are good mediums didn't want the ability. It is, you know, they get interrupted all the time. But there are methods to develop mediumship. I've taken them, I've taken classes, and I have stood up in front of a room full of people, most of whom I did not know, and I was assigned You know, I have to just ask someone, would you like to hear from someone? They say yes, and I have to start talking. And then I see tears. I get a name, a description, an event, and I see them weeping. And I don't know how. It feels like you're making it up. You feel terribly vulnerable, but it is possible. You really have to want to work at it. And there are some good courses and some places you can go. Actually, the Metaphysical Seminary in Roanoke, Virginia, where I took my first training in mediumship, they train mediums. And Reed Brown is one of he doesn't teach in the seminary, but he's one of 4 people there who have the ability that he has.
Hey, Stephen, I have a question. This is probably one of the most interesting presentations I've ever seen, to be honest with you, probably my favorite. This is one of my favorite things that I love is the paranormal things. And I have one quick question for you. Now, I watch a lot of these paranormal shows, and sometimes I get little, skeptical of things on the recordings and poltergeist activities, et cetera, because I don't know if it's real or not. Have you ever encountered any type of poltergeist activities?
I would travel across the country if I could go to an active poltergeist site. But I have personally experienced a few things. We have a group that has been meeting every Sunday night in a room specially prepared for seances. In the style of what was called the Scole experiment, SCOLE, that was conducted for 5 years in the 1990s, that produced over 100 different kinds of phenomena with 1,000 witnesses without a single allegation of cheating. And many of the witnesses were scientists and experts in illusion, stage magicians and things like this. So we've been doing that. And there was one night I brought in, to clean up my library, I brought in a can of tar and a can of floor sealant, a plastic jar, tub of floor sealant, carried them both with one hand so I could open the doorknob. And it kind of hurt. I remember wanting to put them down. I just put them down inside, and they were right next to each other. And they were about this far from a plastic bag leaning up against something with 2 picture frames with glass in them. During our seance, we heard a crash of something, and it was recorded. We didn't see anything in the library. I opened the door, and the plastic bag that had been standing leaning like this with the handle up had not fallen this way, but had fallen and turned 90 degrees. And the can of tar, if this are the picture frames, the can of tar was sitting halfway over it like this.
Wow.
And we went back and I duplicated the sound so that we can compare them on the recording, and they were identical. No idea how that happened. And the other thing that happened, which is, the idea of synchronicities, that weird, it's more than a coincidence, just what you need shows up at the right time. I have a theory that could be our subconscious practicing that ability, even while we're consciously amazed and awed by it or in denial. And there was an instance where a Masonic brother called me and said, I have to come home. My back is hurting. I need a ride from the airport. I picked him up at the airport. He said, I had just called my son, who informed me that my overcoat with my house and car keys is still in California. I don't know how I'm going to get in. I don't know how I'm going to drive to the doctor tomorrow. Well, I'm from Brooklyn. I'll get you in your house. So, the credit card thing, well, okay, this piece of a bleach bottle works much better. It's much more flexible and durable, and doesn't ruin your credit card. I was in his door in 2 seconds and carried his luggage in. We're sitting inside, and he's talking about, well, maybe the locksmith can make a key from the VIN. I look over in the open area of the floor where he walked in, and there's a car key with the electronic key fob right there in the middle of the area. I picked it up and I said, is this it? He looked at it and he said, let's go check, because he has another car, his girlfriend's car, but she has the keys, and she was in South America. So he only had one car and he needed a key. So we went out and it unlocked the car. And then he looked at me, he said, "Brother, this has been missing for 5 or 6 months. You're beginning to make a believer out of me." How that key would just suddenly appear there right in the middle of the floor. So, it's not poltergeist in the sense of the destruction. Poltergeist activity is always destructive, but I believe that there's another part of us that has the same ability but uses it constructively. And I actually suspect that Jesus may have been an extremely psychic and psychokinetic person who was teaching other people how to do these things.
Thank you for that. And I just want to say that I wish actually I was, by listening to your recordings, I actually wish I was there with you, because it makes me, I wish I was there to witness that.
Renee, when the whole COVID pandemic thing's over, you're going to have to come down to North Carolina and pay a visit to Steve's Metaphysical Library, because it will absolutely blow your mind. In fact, you'll probably just move in, I'm sure. Steve charges phenomenal rent. It's okay.
It's almost 13,000 volumes now. Other questions, comments?
We have another on Facebook. Mark Alexander asked, if ghosts exist and are seen here in our earthly experience, or earthly existence, does that prove that heaven or hell does not exist?
Apples and oranges. It depends on your definitions of heaven and hell. I would recommend getting Bart Ehrman's book called Heaven and Hell, which just came out. Bart Ehrman is probably the world's most famous bad boy of the New Testament, where he's explaining how all of these, how many people got their sticky fingers in, and what got changed, and who did what for what reason, and all that. He teaches at UNC here, and but he's just come out with a book called Heaven and Hell, where he explains all of the permutations of those concepts going back. So if you think of heaven and hell as, one place where you're going to fly around with angel wings playing the harp forever, for me that would be hell. And the other, the heaven one, the version of hell is where all the fun people are. So I'm not really sure who thought all this stuff up, but you can read accounts from near-death experiencers. Now, I didn't cover near-death experiences because that's a really good example. We've covered it basically with mediumship. Could that be super psi? That you're just getting this information as if it's like a dream or something. Now, the people who've experienced it say, no, absolutely not. This was more real than regular life was. I knew everything that had happened to me in my entire lifetime. I understood the repercussions of every bad thing I did. I saw the moments when I was truly kind, and I understand now what I was supposed to be doing when I was here, which was developing spiritually to be a kinder and more loving person. And now that I'm back, I'm going to make up for lost time. So those near-death accounts are really valuable. And if you do study, how heaven and hell came around, I think you'll see a lot of mythological and magical thinking has been involved.
Yes, I have a few questions, actually. Fantastic presentation, fascinating, actually. And firstly, you mentioned a book by Sir William Crookes. Do you have the name of this book?
Yeah, I'm actually, I haven't quite finished a reference list for you. I didn't finish reincarnation, and let's see, possession. Yeah, in fact, I'll post this as I have it right now in the chat, because you can save the chat, but not only that, the links will be live, and many of these are links to specific web pages, or they are links to, for instance, archive.org, where you can download. That's the link for the PDF.
That's fantastic. Can I take you back to you were talking about the two brothers and their father died and appeared, and there's a couple of different sort of musings as to how this happened. I'm of the thought that when you're asleep, your electromagnetic field is in its sort of natural state, and something else coming into that field would automatically wake you up anyway, and therefore be a little bit more responsive to what's in front of you. I'm just wondering what your own thoughts about that story is, how you think that would have manifested.
Well, it was a good example that was used in there. I have two books by philosophers who really looked at these phenomena and tore them apart. Stephen Browdy is an emeritus from University of Maryland. It took him 8 years to write Immortal Remains, partly because he felt that he needed to fully understand multiple personality, reincarnation, and possession. If you manage to take before he could tackle those issues. By the way, multiple personality is really interesting because there are well-documented cases, and every psychiatrist knows these cases where one of the personalities is diabetic and the other is not in the same body. One has thick glasses and the other has 20/20 vision, and one there was an 8-year-old boy, one of his personalities was allergic to orange juice and break out in hives, and the other had no difficulty with orange juice, which really, makes you wonder to what extent does the mind create the body. And then you could perhaps understand how the father's consciousness was able to materialize a body.
Right,
so it wasn't necessarily the best example, but on that reading list under survival, you'll see a book called Phantasms of the Living by Gurney et al. That was published in 1882, and it was the opening salvo of the Society for Psychical Research. 702 or 704 veridical cases of apparition sightings by multiple credible people, under circumstances, in other words, where it's documented and such that you're able to see that, yes, that other people knew about it at the time and so on. And just to make it more interesting, some of the apparitions were of living people.
That's fantastic. Yes, and also I'd like to tell a little story from local. There's a seer who lives in the Croft, or used to live. He died a few years back. Who lives in the Croft next to my parents' land. I live up in the Highlands of Scotland, and his name's Swainy MacDonald, and he was a true seer. And one day in 1996, there was a tribal chief came to Scotland looking for his grandfather's skull, and his grandfather was King Hitsu of Gion in tribal South Africa, and he was sent on a dream quest by Nelson Mandela to find his grandfather's skull, because his skull was missing, and therefore chaos and destruction would wander around the country, the same as he would wander around this country, because he was the tribal chief of that country, and also he was a shaman, and his grandson was the modern shaman of that tribe. So he came up to the Highlands and for some strange reason bumped into Swainy MacDonald, and Swainy MacDonald knew exactly where this skull was. He didn't know himself, but he guided the tribal chief to a barn on a baronet. We've got sort of peerage system in the Highlands or in Britain, and there's baronets, and the baronet land, it was actually his great-grandfather the great-great-great-grandfather in 1835 shot King Hitsu through the head and decapitated him and took his skull back and hid it in the barn on his land. And so the tribal chief retrieved the skull and took it back to South Africa and took it to Nelson Mandela. Now, it's documented. This is a documented story, and it was followed by the Scotsman newspaper. But the Scotsman newspaper missed out the Sweeney MacDonald part and proclaimed that it was the museum in another county that sort of knew the story about the skull and told the witch doctor where the skull was. But that's not quite true. I can give you a link to.
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and he was a true seer, and it was a great friend of my grandmother, and
one of my favorite stories. If a person has an intention to know something and has those abilities, they will acquire the information. And there was an artist from New York named Ingo Swann, who, when the U.S. government went to SRI think tank at Stanford, concerned that the Russians were using psychics against us, and they just said, let us know that there's nothing to this. So the SRI people did some experiments, got some people who claimed to have certain abilities, and 6 months or so came back to the U.S. government and said, well, not only is it possible, it is not possible to hide anything. It doesn't matter where you put it, that these people have access. And one of the coolest stories was that Ingo Swann, he was one of the more gifted people, and they kept giving him very childish, easy exercises to do, and he threatened to quit because he was said, you're insulting my intelligence. So they had some coordinates of Earth coordinates, and they asked him to describe what was at those coordinates, and he did it so well that they were pretty sure he had an eidetic memory and had memorized the topography of the entire planet. But they found some dinky little island somewhere that you've never heard of, and gave him coordinates, and he started meditating, and then he realized he's out in the middle of open water. Oh, there's an island over there. They probably got the coordinates wrong. That's probably what they wanted. So then he took his pencil and his paper, and I'll show you, and he just started tapping. And he could feel when he was tapping land versus water. So he started drawing the contour of this island, and it was a very kind of jagged island with a harbor and mountains on one side and all of this. And he drew a really, really accurate map of this island just by tapping and noticing what he was hearing or perceiving based on the tap. So he used the tapping to draw the outline. And we're talking here, it's not a round island. It's got inlets, and at that point they were pretty blown away. Yeah, a person with these abilities can get almost any information they seek, but they can't do it all the time. And they can't always get very detailed information. But you can get to the point where you know when this is psychic information versus your thoughts. Because that's one of the first things, is to be able to discern that. And the other is to not to care whether you're wrong. Because if your ego is in it, then you're going to try to think of the answers. And you cannot think and be psychic. You have got to get out of the way and then just see what arises. And this is why every person who does any kind of work like this is a very dedicated meditator.
I'm a very firm believer in psychic abilities, actually. And just one last question, or it's a little bit more than a question. Can I take you back to the George and Ethan scenario?
Yes.
Was it Ethan? Yes. Now,
Edwin.
Edwin, sorry. So you've got a tape there of the conversation that happened. So how did the situation arise that you were in contact with Edwin? Did he approach you, or and what did you see in him? How did you know? And what happened afterwards when Edwin, he realized he was dead? Did he go away gracefully? Sorry for asking that.
Yeah, no.
Fascinating.
I wish that I had more cases like that. I've got others where clearly I'm talking to another person, and there have been several where as soon as I'm talking to one of them, he says or she says, "There's a whole bunch of us here."
So did he? Sorry to interrupt. Sorry, did he come into your office or
no?
How?
I was staying with my best friend in Manhattan, and this fellow was there. And when I was telling, my best friend wanted to become an Episcopal priest. And I was looking at, well, we know so much more about consciousness and such. And, you know, the Orthodox religions are probably, could benefit from enlightenment from these other areas. So I was kind of giving him a little bit of, you know, well, just think about what you're doing. And Edwin was there. And when I was talking about spirit attachments, also wondering if my friend had any, because he certainly was a candidate for picking them up with some of his lifestyle choices. Edwin said, oh, I think I've got that as well. He said, for instance, when I got on the subway at 125th Street, I don't remember anything until I was standing on the platform at 23rd Street. He doesn't remember getting on the train. He doesn't remember getting off.
So
that's one of the symptoms. So I took him inside, used hypnosis. The first attachment was a woman. You can usually tell because the voice tends to be more like this and softer. And she was hysterical. And it was entirely in Spanish. And, you know, I can speak a little bit of Spanish, but I don't think I'm in the condition to do exorcisms in Spanish yet. So I let it go and later played the recording for a friend who's bilingual, who said it was a woman who was murdered while she was being raped. And she said the man who did it had one blue and one brown eye, which is not the sort of thing that you're just going to make up and throw in there in the middle of all that. The second attachment was George. And the third, I said, tell me your name. And a woman said, Nora. And I said, and how do you know Edwin? And she said, es mi hijo. He's my son. And I asked, well, why are you here with him? And she said in Spanish, to protect him from the others. So I did nothing to try to move her out. But George left. He got angry and he swore at me, tell the fucking kid not to call me down then. And he was gone. And so I didn't get to help him to go into the light. He wasn't ready to, and he does have free will. But the other part about this is that when I brought Edwin out of hypnosis, first thing I said was, well, I was just talking with your mother, Nora, and he looked shocked and he said, how did you know my mother's name? It is the only time I've worked with someone where they didn't have vivid recall of everything that happened under hypnosis. I've had where I was doing spirit releasement work with a woman with a master's degree in science. And she knew that the person who was talking was in her body, and she felt like they were side by side, and she wanted to argue with him. So she had her own thought processes going on while he was talking to me. That was, but Edwin had no recollection. And so I played the entire recording for him as well as my friend. My friend stood there like this the whole time, and Edwin had his knees up to his legs and he was shaking the entire time. And I told him I would need to work with him again because there's some serious issues, and he disappeared.
So how do these souls attach themselves to living flesh, so to speak? In your opinion, do they want to? Are they practicing some kind of ESP, or does it just happen like that?
Various ideas. Sometimes one of the things we do when we do this therapy is to ask what made it possible for them to get in. Very often there is a
mental state, maybe.
There are certain things that apparently, okay, we're going to get entirely metaphysical here. There's no science to show that there's an aura that protects us. But there is one of the most amazing descriptions of attachment taking place that a psychiatrist observed before. He was a young man. He wasn't yet a psychiatrist. He was having a near-death experience. He had double lumbar pneumonia and had died at age 21. He had a period where he was taken by a light being to see things. And one of the things he saw this was in 1946, was a crowded sailors' bar where the sailors were 3 deep at the bar, and they were trying to get whiskey and drink it and get it refilled as quickly as possible. And he said, I was in a college fraternity, but I've never seen drinking like this. And he noticed that almost all the sailors seemed to give off a kind of a glow, but not all of them did. And the ones who didn't, who were trying to snatch the glasses with whiskey, tried to pick them up but couldn't lift them. And he realized it was because they were not physical, they were spirits. And then he noticed that he didn't have a glow. So he realized that he's a spirit. And then at this point, one of the sailors who's really drunk is sitting on a stool. He passed out from drinking, and the glow opened up from here down to his shoulders, and 3 of these non-physicals disappeared through the crown of his head.
That's mind-blowing.
The name of the book is, I think it's Return to Tomorrow, and his name is George Ritchie, R-I-T-C-H-I-E, and he didn't write the book until the 1970s when he retired as a board-certified psychiatrist. But when he decided to go to medical school and was interested in psychiatry, they always interview you to make sure that you're not going to, that you're mentally balanced. And they asked him why he chose psychiatry. And so he told them about his near-death experience. And then they told him that they had heard about this experience through hearsay, and that they had agreed that if he did not admit to it, they would not have recommended him for psychiatry.
Wow.
So they accepted him for that. So, and that you can get that Return to Tomorrow, pick up paperbacks. It's a fairly short book. Board certified psychiatrist talking about his near-death experience and his journeys out of the body while he was dead.
And Steve, Brother Mo has a question for you. Mo,
hey, Brother Mo.
Unmute yourself.
Yeah. So regarding that psych who figured out with the coordinates during whatever Cold War, and he found himself, he's in the water. Did he document how did he see it? Like, did he actually see an image of it? Or did he actually teleported his soul out of his body and he placed himself over there? Or that's something they don't share?
I haven't read most of his books, which recently the foundation that made a lot of his books available lately. In fact, I just got 2 of them, which I haven't yet looked at. He's willing to teach anybody the abilities and practices that he had. I'm sending the link to George Ritchie. He was the psychiatrist who had the near-death experience. I want to make sure just quickly that it's the right MD. Okay, yeah, it's him. So yeah, because it could be a rock singer or something. He was one of those people who seemed to have multiple abilities. One of the things he was able to do was to change the temperature inside a highly sensitive, it's called a thermistor. And apparently you can measure the temperature to 1,000th of a degree Celsius in it. And he was, said, okay, make it cooler or hotter. And he's sitting 40 feet away. And not only did the temperature change, but they also measured an equivalent opposite change of temperature nearby. In other words, the law of thermodynamics, that, everything has to be equal. So if it got cold here, it got warmer there. And he was able to do this consistently. Ingo Swann is his name. And he, I'll type in and you can just avoid Wikipedia. I definitely recommend going to the answer to Wikipedia. It's from the Society for Psychical Research, where they're really posting all of their information. And that was already on the list I gave before. But you can look these people up and see all the things that they did. Ingo Swann was responsible in the Psychic Spies program for the government in developing a protocol. The government wasn't interested in having a few psychic spies spying on the enemies. They were interested in knowing how they could train 5,000 people and say, take 1,000 of them, have them focus on a single target, and then do a meta-analysis of all the data to figure out what was true versus what other impressions, because we do get other stuff. But they were never able to train people past their stage 3 of the 6 stages that Ingo had set out. So they realized that you can get better at the levels that you have, but you cannot apparently really improve beyond whatever ability you have. That was one of the reasons the Psychic Spies program was put aside. Another was, of course, electronic surveillance and satellites and such were superior, and also counter espionage was also excellent. So they didn't need a psychic sitting in a little room in Virginia describing what was going on in a warehouse in Minsk, which is where they started. Ingo Swann is he's one of those people, the kind of the Renaissance man of psychic abilities. So you definitely want to look up his stuff. More questions?
Yeah, Worshipful Brother Steve, we have a question from J.R. Fish over on Facebook, and he said, I'd like to hear your take on the possibility of once an intentional path to access the super psi was established, could it be possible that a spirit could tap that path to the medium without intention? So I think what he's saying.
I'm going to have to think about that. Well, the first thing is that we don't know that super psi exists. That was the out that parapsychologists came up with when the parapsychologists did not want to profess a belief in survival. So they came up with this super psi theory. But Stephen Browdy, in his book Immortal Remains, described, well, this was the most brilliant thing about that book. Absolutely, it is a monument. Of all the areas that suggest that consciousness is not produced by the brain, and he looked at survival, there were 2 kinds of cases, of which you've seen one. That was the case with the, I've got to go back. It was the one where they, I have to go back and look at, what was the last case I showed? All right, anyway, it was the one where the philosophers were able to say that, oh, it was the mediumship, Runke's leg. Yeah. That the amount of information that had to be gathered from all these different sources that was not known and all of this created was cripplingly complex. So there were 2 areas that he pulled everything apart, looked at everything, and said, these 2 areas, survival is easily the best answer. Many of the other areas, survival and another explanation. In some cases, the explanations were fairly complicated, but they were possible. But then every single explanation from ESP all the way through all the survival areas all had survival as one possible explanation. And so he said it's the fact that the other ones have different explanations other than survival. So you've got this multitude of different explanations, or we have one simple explanation that works for everything. And so in addition to the 2 areas where super psi was cripplingly complex and survival made sense, it also works for all the solutions. And so that's how philosophy really has worked with a topic that's very difficult and controversial. Immortal Remains is the book, and it is a monument. You don't need to understand philosophy because he lays things out very clearly, but a little bit of a working knowledge, and he explains why telepathy, how it might work, and he will think of angles of the way things might be working that you would not ordinarily have thought of. That one I gave with the fellow, his father awoke him in a dream, and then he's telepathically showing it to his brother, and all that was not something I would have come up with. But he examines all of these and weighs them in terms of logic in order to determine what is most likely. So I'm going to type it. It's Immortal Remains. I spoke with him recently. Stephen E. Brody. He's in Vegas, if anybody's out there. And
I just posted the link to Amazon if anybody wants to order that.
Okay, I always try to get used books if I can, so they don't get thrown in the trash or in the recycling. Thrift books, but you have to order $10 worth to get free shipping. Better World Books doesn't have any shipping costs. Check eBay, you'll often find somebody selling it, maybe the same price. And they might even be selling it on one of the used sites, but at eBay they might have free shipping. This is how I've been building my library. Sometimes the mailman shows up with an entire carrier full of books.
Hey, Stephen. Two questions. First, there was a question in Zoom. One of them was, have you heard of Allan Kardec? He was a spiritualist at the time.
He was not a spiritualist. He was the head of the Spiritist.
Okay.
The difference between spiritualism and spiritism is that spiritism automatically accepted reincarnation. The spiritualist movement didn't. And people, in fact, the International Society, ISF, International Spiritualist Foundation, and the other one, I'm a member of one of them, I don't remember which, are falling apart now because the science is showing that reincarnation is very likely, but the old-time spiritualists want to be whoever they were in that one lifetime and don't want to be someone else. And so people walking and tearing their certifications up and storming out. Spiritualists are not ready yet completely to accept reincarnation. Kardec was, he was a Frenchman. That wasn't his real name. I've forgotten his real name. The Spirits book and the Mediums book are both excellent. But you have to get, they were Christianized in the English printings earlier on. So you have to go and get a more modern edition that has had all the kind of Christian leanings taken out, because Kardec did not write those things. I see Irene is nodding her head, so she apparently knows something about this.
She was the one that asked the question.
Oh.
Yeah.
So right now there's this. By the way, there's a fantastic website if you're interested in all the early movements of this. This is a website. I don't know who these guys are. I've talked with them. I've sent the material. They are trying to document the entire history of spiritualism. And remember, spiritualism, the phenomena of spiritualism were studied by the scientists to learn about forces and things that became psychical studies and parapsychology. But almost every journal in spiritualism ever published, all the books, they're all there in PDF, absolutely free of charge. And it's Google searchable. I want to just make sure I give you the right URL, because this is a gold mine. Okay, got it.
My other question, Stephen, while you're doing that is, I know that I've encountered many people who claim to be psychics and mediums, who claim to read auras and stuff like that. And I have debunked them many times, but my thing is when you're doing the EVPs and stuff like that, and trying to record voices, do you use the tiny little EVP thing, or you use sometimes a spirit box, like these little, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Spirit box is a toy for entertainment purposes only.
Got it.
There are, I use good digital recorders for EVP to work. EVP stands for electronic voice phenomena, and I'm going to end by playing one for you. And this was the one. This is where I realized if one ghost exists, then we don't die. I use good digital recorders. There are 3 techniques. One is you just leave them in a place and come back later. And that's the easiest, because if you look at the amplitude chart, say in Adobe Audition or something like that, you could see if anything's there. You don't have to listen to 8 hours of silence just to hear somebody say, "I'll get you," or something like that. I have an EVP where I think he says, "I'll get you, bitch." It's pretty clear, whatever it is.
I have to hear this.
And let me think. There's another way, is to sit quietly and ask a question like, "Is this your house?" And you wait 15 seconds, and you have to wait 15 seconds. The recorders I tend to like are Olympus. You want to make sure you get one that can download, plug into USB. When I started this, they didn't have that, and it took forever to transfer data. Do you like getting visitors? I remember once in an antebellum mansion asking, "What do you think of Abraham Lincoln?" And I had to leave the room because I don't know what it was. It just felt like a wall of something just rushed right through me, and I just did not feel safe there. And I'm not at all scared. The third way to do EVP work is to just have a conversation about some topic that might be interesting to those who are still there and see if they interject. The pity with that is that they interject often while you're speaking, and so you don't quite have the clarity that you would have had if you'd been silent. But the toys of ghost hunting, you know, just a little critical thinking. Critical thinking is the most valuable tool. So if they're selling a device for $100, that's called the ovilus, okay? The ovilus periodically spews out individual words. Baptism, creek, you know, just like that. And first of all, you need to be recording it because you're not going to have a record of what it said. But the premise on which this thing works is that it has 1,024 words in it, I think is the number, that there are detectors that notice a change in temperature, up, down, or no change. Notice a change in humidity, up, down, or none. Notice a fluctuation in the electromagnetic field, and would also notice a change in, see, temperature, humidity, EMF. I don't remember what the fourth one is, but okay. So essentially, to get the ovilus to say any one word, you would have to be able to, as a spirit, alter the humidity, the temperature, the electromagnetic field, and whatever that fourth parameter was. You would also need to know the entire vocabulary in the ovilus in order to know which word you want it to say, and you would have to know exactly those four parameters, which of them you have to alter in order to get it to say it. And do you think you can make a device for $100 that can measure minute changes in temperature, humidity? Wish I can remember what the fourth. This is silly. The thing is just kind of randomly spewing out names, and people attribute all sorts of phenomena to this. The other one that is a little bit questionable, called the Frank's box or the Shack Hack, is a portable radio that is set so it's scanning through channels. So you're getting like that. And you need to be recording that. And the idea is that a spirit can somehow put words together from the sounds in order to communicate things. Now, Patrick Burns, who was the paranormal investigator for a TV show called Haunting Evidence, with two mediums and a paranormalist, he claims that the first time he was exposed to one of these, that there is a medium on the other side who is operating it, whose name was Seven. So the person said to the box, to medium Seven, I'd like you to meet Patrick Burns. And Patrick Burns said, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Seven." And according to Patrick Burns, the radio then said, "It's a pleasure to meet you too, Patrick Burns." These are toys. The best thing you do is just set up recorders. EVP are the strongest evidence. There's very little you can capture in video. We use video cameras, our security system, to monitor electromagnetic meters and things like this. So we have a record with a timestamp of what they're doing. We monitor where people are, so we can account for something if somebody's in a place they shouldn't be, or if there are people outside pranking us. We always tell people, do not tell anybody we're coming, because we don't need to deal with the neighborhood gang having some fun with us. And but you also want to take photographs of everything in case anything moves. Only in one case, we were upstairs, the house was wild. And we heard something happen downstairs. And on the recording, you could hear what it was. It was a Christmas tree ornament that was tugged 4 times with increasing strength from the Christmas tree, and when it came loose, was thrown across the wooden floor in the room. When I got home, heard the recording, I called the people, said, "Can you look around the floor and tell me if there's anything on the floor in the living room that is in the wrong place?" She said, "Yeah, there's a little green plastic Christmas tree ornament." And that's what it sounded like. And this was early December, and they had a little tree set up. So those phenomena are rare, but if you have photographs of where everything was before you started and everything was when you left, there could be something there.
Steve, Brother Stephen O'Donnell asked about the model of the Olympus recorder. I don't know if there's a specific recorder that works better than others, or
they're getting better. Mine are 3 years old, and they were rebuilds, factory rebuilds. The early one I had was mono, and it had a lot of noise, white noise in it, background, which Adobe Audition can remove without affecting the quality of the EVP. I don't like tampering with EVP. If I cannot hear what it's saying, then I'm probably going to dismiss it, unless there were a couple of cases where we just kept getting sounds that didn't belong there. And even though we couldn't figure out what the sound was communicating, just the fact that they were there on different people's recorders, and it wasn't anything that we could explain or account for, suggested that there was something. Don't know what it was. I like the Olympus ones. I don't think I have one right here. No, I don't have one. They're downstairs. But you just plug them in. Oh, you're going to make me look at this. Yeah, and they're used for regular recording. By the way, we're very fortunate in North Carolina. You can record any conversation as long as you're in it, and you can use it in evidence in court. And there are only 2 states in the U.S. that's possible. I won a lawsuit against an auto repair shop once by having recorded their conversations, and they were admissible. And they had perjured themselves. Oh, it was lovely.
Steve, I got 2 last questions, and that's it. And by the way, I would love to go to North Carolina and at least witness a case. One thing is, what do you think about? My first question is, what do you think about the infrared that they use? They use this infrared technology for when they do these investigations. And my second question is, what is the most scariest recordings you have ever recorded?
Well, I'll play the scary recordings for you. There are a couple of them. I think when you're saying infrared, are you talking about the FLIRs, the heat, the ones that detect different changes or measure temperatures with different colors?
Yes.
It all depends on whether spirits are physical or not. And the question is, cold spots, for instance. I had a cold spot here for about 3 months, and it was so cold it was giving me earaches, and I had to have 4 layers of thermal blankets on me because my legs were getting so cold. It was kind of a cold like if you had a damp cloth sitting there and it was drawing the heat out. And I thought I was imagining it, but a friend came over to hear EVP. The computer was hooked up to the internet with a cable. So it was on the bed, and he was kneeling on the bed with his knees on the floor, listening with headphones. And he stuck his hand out to the left, and he said, "Dude, have you got a cold spot?" And I said, "So you mean I'm not imagining it?" Up, out, gone, never set foot in the room again. But are cold spots actual changes in temperature, or are they psychic? And that's the question. I don't have a FLIR. I mean, they're $1,500 and such. It's a lot of money to invest in a device that might not help you at all with ghost investigation. There is a device I'm wanting to try out. In the list I sent you, I mentioned the pair, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Lab. They make a thing here, which is a random number generator. gets hooked up to a computer, and the software with it. You'll see that in the link if you go to Robert Jan. I sent it, the one about Princeton. He was a rocket scientist. It's kind of nice that in this field we have both a rocket science and a brain surgeon. Robert Jan was the rocket scientist at Princeton. He has patents for jet propulsion, worked with NASA, and he was a dean of engineering at Princeton. So he knows stuff. And he got interested in this. And random event generators that are real random event generators are very useful. And he did an experiment with 375,000 trials where the probability of those results was 15,000 to 1, showing that a person's intention can affect a random event generator. And that's why I bought this. But I'm thinking about using this in ghost investigations to see if spirits, if it goes out of random, which would be the chance range, and somehow moves outside of chance in a ghost investigation over a long time, because spirits are conscious. The other question you asked, well, anything you see on TV, you have to remember is for entertainment purposes only. Do you know why they do ghost hunting in the dark with infrared? Because it's scarier for the people watching it at home. But you will not see an apparition in the dark. You need light to see an apparition. So, so that is, and you don't walk around with recorders saying, show us a sign of your presence. You set up very careful equipment. You leave it. Interviews, you want to find out if somebody's always needs to be present when stuff goes on, you want them there. Because you're hoping that the things that happened will happen while you're there. They rarely do. Basically, you get home, you think nothing happened, then you turn on the recorders and you sit there for hours and hours. And if you're lucky, there'll be something on the recorder. Now I'm going to play one for you. And this was the one that for me was, for me just, blew me away. Let's see okay, there I am. So let me see if I can find this. Make sure I'm still sharing audio. Okay. I got to get out of this. Let's see. Hold on. PowerPoint. There. That's not it. Or is it? It is. I should stop sharing so you don't have to look at all this weird stuff I'm doing. Okay, here we are. Okay, number 48. This is the one I want to share. We did an investigation in a very, very large house. I believe it had 43 bedrooms on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And we were called in by a local team because they were, we called in by the local team because there were only 4 people and it's a 5-story house with all these bedrooms. And so we brought 8 people, they were 4, and then the curator, who's the woman standing with her hand on her elbow, and she has an assistant. So we were 14 people standing in the main lobby of this elegant 1910 Art Nouveau house. And we brought a woman who claims to be, she's a medium claimant. That's the lady with her hand up in the red. Lots of ego. I was never convinced that she was a valid medium. And it was all about her. She was the medium of the group. And she decided she was going to give a reading of every room in the house, which took 40 minutes. The fellow sitting next to her was the head of the team. And you could see he has the kill me now look. But he agreed or understood that there was nothing else he could do. So she was telling the curator. Now, what you see in white is what is actually on the recording. It was just a snippet. And unfortunately, although it was the only EVP of the entire investigation that anybody got, the entire recording went lost. But I did send the snippet by email, so I was able to find it. So she's telling the curator, In the music room behind us, that you can see a light in the upper left corner, there's a parlor, a big room where you'd have parties and such. She's saying, in the music room behind us, I'm hearing a man singing. Have you ever heard a man singing music? And then on the recording, you'll hear her say, or any falsetto voice. Then you'll hear the curator say, I've never personally heard music here. Have you? She turned to her assistant. So on the recording, you'll hear 2 women, or any falsetto voice. I've never personally heard music here. Have you? So here's what I captured.
Or any falsetto voice. I have never personally heard music here. Have you? Or any falsetto voice. I have never personally heard music here. Have you? Or any falsetto voice. I have never personally heard music here. Have you?
So I take it you all heard that?
Yeah, it was like, it sounded like somebody very faintly, someone in the back, like something like that, right?
Yeah, he says the word falsetto and then he sings in a falsetto voice. He said falsetto. Ah. I'll play it again.
Or any falsetto voice. I have never personally heard music here. Have you? Or any falsetto voice. I have never personally heard music here. Have you? Or any falsetto voice. I have never personally heard music here. Have you?
So I imagine you probably heard it better now. Falsetto is an extremely unusual word. So here's a discarnate. We don't hear him. None of us heard him. Who not only repeats this word, but then demonstrates that he knows what it means, which means he's fully conscious, fully aware of what we are doing. And at that point, that was the point at which I said, okay, if one ghost exists, there's the evidence that we don't die. I have no explanation for how the sound that he made, why we don't hear it, and how it gets on the recording. I would like to say cognitive dissonance, that we don't believe we should hear a voice and therefore we don't, but that's really asking too much. There's a possibility that the frequency that they communicate on is not a frequency that we can hear. Some audiologists have looked at the frequency of EVP and said this could not have been produced by a human voice because there are things that are missing from it. So, but they do record. They can be recorded. That one was extraordinarily clear. There is one case where we finally advised the family to move. They had bought a house that was 2 years old from a friend of the husband in the same line of business. He built the house. He lived there as a bachelor a year. He got married. And then a year later, he moved his business nearby, so he sold the house to this friend. So the friend has a wife and sons, 15, 8, and 2 years old. They're in the house 2 days, and the 2-year-old is in the den asking the man to roll the ball back. And he went to his father and said, the man won't roll the ball back. What man? And this went on for a little bit. There were also instances where people were catching shadows, figures out of the corners of their eyes. And one of them seemed to be a tall, thin man, possibly wearing a cape or something. Anyway, we got called in. I have to be very, sometimes I'm not going to be prudish about the things that happen. They just happen. We were called in because the wife was in the shower and she felt a man's hand run through her hair. So, there's the 2-year-old saying the man won't play ball, won't roll the ball back, and all of this. We went and we got 2 EVP of the same voice in this house. I'll play those for you. We presented them to the family and let them know, yes, well, we have some evidence that there is something paranormal going on here. Gave them some advice as how they might encourage him to move on. Wasn't really working. I'm trying to remember why we came back the second time. Okay, the second time we came back was because wife wouldn't undress, and she wouldn't speak to the female investigator. She's wearing a parka, and she was just like this. And her husband, nice, typical Southern Baptist fella, he said, well, me and the wife, we was doing, well, what married folks do behind closed doors. And she got poked where I ain't even allowed to touch her. So I had to, okay. So I got the picture. I see some of you got it quicker than I did, but I got the picture. How would she know that he didn't do this? Okay, got the whole picture, the architecture, everything is there. All right, and at this point, she's really not happy. So we didn't get anything more, tried to comfort her. Then we went back again because the wife was out with the 15 and 8-year-old. The 2-year-old, who's now 3, has his room next to the kitchen. The father's putting the kid into his bed. I think it was a crib or something like that. But he noticed when he looked out the window that the separate garage in the back, the light was on inside. Now this garage contains his NASCAR and Nazi memorabilia. So he has locks on it, he's got an alarm system, and he hasn't been in this building for a couple of months. So why is the light on inside? So after he put his son to bed, he went out through the bedroom into the kitchen, went out the back door to the deck, and as he's walking down the stairs past his son's window, the son's bed is here and the window is here, and he sees somebody pull the Venetian blind down like they're looking through. So he ran back up, and the boy is saying, "Get off me, get off me." He's trying to comfort his son. The room is ice cold. He turns around and he sees a dark, thin figure standing in the doorway. Tells him, "Please leave my family alone. Please don't hurt us. Just leave us alone," and all of this. Stayed with his son. Everything normalized. He thought, okay, kid's asleep. He went back through the kitchen, got to the deck, and he looks toward the garage, and the light inside is now off. So that's the point, and I'll play the 2 EVP we got from that case. And that's the point at which because the wife was so uncomfortable, we said, and this was 2009. This was after the real estate crash. So they couldn't sell the house. Advice, see if you can find somebody to rent it. Go live somewhere else until you can sell it. Because they were not going to feel safe or happy in this house at this point. So let me go find the 2 EVP I got from that house. Hopefully I included them here. I did not. Open another PowerPoint. Won't take long. Documents. All right, this should do it. So I've been teaching this to continuing education at Duke University. I love to show old people that they don't need to fear death by looking at these things. So here we are. There it is. Okay, share screen. Way too much technology for me. And that's it. And this is the house. And let's see, slideshow, current slide. So this is the house, 4 years old. And here's one of the 2 EVP we got. You may have heard him say, "I'll get you." It's very clear where I am. Obviously, it's this may not be the ideal way to hear, but I'll play it again. I'll get you. And he has a rather hoarse voice. So the other one we got, our female investigator, we left a voice recorder down in the den where the boy plays with the man. And the female investigator was coming down the stairs, and the voice recorder, this is a large room. It's like, could probably park 2 cars, 3 cars in it. And the voice recorder was in the middle of the room. And as she was coming down the stairs, oh no, this is the one we're sitting around in that room just talking. The other one, I'll get you, was when she was coming down the stairs. We're sitting around talking, and then you'll hear quite loud when he comes in. It's still kind of coarse sounding, but it's quite loud when it comes in, so you'll know that that's what it is.
There's a little boy here.
So something will come, bitch.
There's a little boy here.
So hopefully you were able to hear those well enough. Something we can't make out the first word. It's 2 or 3 syllables, but then will come, bitch. So he was really unpleasant, and he wasn't going away. So we, I don't know. I'd like to go back to some of the places. I've been to places where I did sleep over at one of the houses once. The house had no water, no electric. It was owned. This is such a cool story. Get a phone call. He says, I'm calling you from a prepaid cell phone. No one must ever find out I'm contacting you. I work at such and such Air Force base, and I have a very high security clearance. We bought this house a few years ago. We couldn't stay in it. The dog wouldn't go in one room. Devices like the microwave kept turning on. We kept hearing people calling, family members calling other family members when they didn't, and this whole list of things. So he decided to rent it out because they're living adjacent to this base. And they rented it out, and he said, in 5 years, 8 families have been in that house and stayed 3 to 6 months. And they call me usually on a Saturday morning and say, oh, we found a house, another house down the block we really like. We're moving today. Sorry for the short notice. So we went out there, and in the first 2 hours, I got 5 EVP that don't seem to relate to us. The first one very early in, that's the real deal. There's a woman who says her name, and there's several other things. Oh, by the way, I have a nice range of expletives from ghosts. But thing was, I told my other guy, I said, you and your wife go to the hotel. I'll sleep here. I'll stay here. Well, it was 53 degrees outside. No heat, no electric, no water. I don't use cell phones, and I don't have a car. And because of his security clearance, I can't even go to a neighbor if anything goes wrong. So as soon as my friends left and drove away, I said, what the hell did I just do? 4 a.m., there was a knock at the door, and that was the only thing that happened. Almost all the activity was early in the evening. I'd love to go back to that house or contact the people and just say, let me know if it's vacant. Any more questions, Such? I've been at this a little while.
Yeah, Steve, we've been going about 3 hours, but Brother Stephen O'Donnell has one last question. We'll let him take the last one for the evening.
Go ahead.
Thanks very much, Brother Matt. Okay, yes, so I get my Olympus EVP recorder. I know a spot where there's some supernatural goings-ons, you know, talks of ghosts. So I'm sitting there. Now, is there anything I have to do? Do I have to prepare myself mentally or spiritually? Is there any cautions? Is there any possibility that a spirit or soul might attach themselves to me, or stick with me for a while to cause me some torment, or how do you go about doing such a thing? Sorry.
Well, first thing for me is that I don't have fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that fear, people practice protection and all that. They're basically screaming, I'm fearful. I go in there with a feeling like most spirits. I have not met a spirit that was really, truly, some of them are like puffing, like this, I'll get you guy and all that. But most of them are confused. Some of them are very pleased to have things explained to them. So I always go in with the feeling that I'm visiting an elderly relative who I care for very much and who has Alzheimer's. So I treat them that way. So I go in, I'm very kind, I explain who I am and why I'm there. And if you can get to that frame of mind, that will help. I don't believe that you need to be concerned about attachments. Somebody asked earlier, what we know, and this is all the metaphysical stuff about attachments, is that they need a way to get in. And often the way that they get in is something that you do to yourself that is making you weaker. And it's the same thing that they do. So for instance, if you are a meth addict, you are not going to pick up an alcoholic. You will pick up another meth addict. But an alcoholic is going to find an alcoholic, because the only thing that alcoholic wants to do is to have that next drink. And he needs a body, because when you drink the alcohol, he feels it. I have this from a friend of mine who was 260 pounds. I asked, what is your name? And the fellow said, John. He said, I don't know what happened. I'm only 20 years old. I was driving the car. I didn't see anything. All of a sudden, car's wrapped around a tree, and I'm standing out next to it. And I look in the window, and I see my body there. And I'm too young to die. He also said there were others there. And then he said, and then I saw this guy, and he looks like he likes to eat. And I like to eat. So I latched on. And not only does he like to eat, but he eats interesting food, and I can taste what he eats when he eats it. Now, that's not multiple personality, because a personality in a body is not going to be surprised that they can have sensual experiences with the body. This was really remarkable. So they will attach, first of all, based on a way to get in. Peebles, who was a spiritualist, he was an Episcopalian and all this, and became a medical doctor, very, very smart man. But he wrote about the attachments, and he said they basically live a godly, righteous, and moral life. Don't do things that will hurt you. So when we hear from people with attachments as to how they got in, there are several ways. Any kind of serious traumatic event. It can be emotional, physical, or, for instance, sexual. Rape, hit by a car, somebody who's seriously grieving might be able to pick up an attachment. Any kind of an addiction. And I hate to tell you, general anesthesia in the hospital. Have you ever heard of these stories where people come out of a hospital after a surgery and suddenly they're desiring to drink vodka or smoke cigars, and they never did before? They picked up an attachment in the hospital. So, but for the most part, we're safe. Apparently they can't attach unless we give them an opening. Having said that, it's also the number of times I've heard there are lots of us here, or there are others here. When you get one, it becomes easier for more and more and more. And that's what I think Edwin, the fact that George walked in 2 hours before, when I asked him, how long have you been with him? I went to hear, oh, well, when he was 4 years old and he broke his leg or something like that. He said about 2 hours ago. That was a real red flag, because that's why Edwin's mother was hanging around to try to protect him. The weird thing is, as weird as all these things sound, the pieces all fit the same puzzle. And let me tell you, I will look at it and I'm going to look for the flaws and the loopholes. And I started as a skeptic. I was sure the mediums were cheating when they were giving messages, but I heard them say, well, I've got Hermione and Wilberforce here. And a person in the church raised their hand. That was her parents. I've never met anybody with either name. You know, John, Mary, okay, that could be coincidence. Hermione and Wilberforce, please. So, so if you're going to do this, you know, be in a good mood. Just sit. Maybe don't dwell on it too long, because every minute you record, you're going to have to listen. Get good headphones. And just, you know, there's 3 ways. One is just to sit and record. The second is to ask questions, but leave a lot of space. And the questions have to be very simple. No multiple choice. Don't tag anything on. And then leave 15 seconds. And 15 seconds is a very long time when you're doing this. You think it's 15 seconds, it's been like 5. And the risk there is that they could be answering just when you speak the next time. And the third is to have a casual conversation with someone, you know, a softish voice so that other sounds could be recorded. Another bit of advice, if you do any EVP recording in a house or something, put the recorders in the middle of the room so you don't have one person sitting next to it who's really loud and the others are soft, so that it's fairly balanced. And I always, it's, by the way, the Society for Psychical Research has a book on guidelines for conducting investigations. It's not terribly expensive, by Stephen Parsons. It's worth gold because, you know, they cover everything in there. Warns you about some of the toys. You're in the UK, so you know, Stephen Parsons isn't actually, he's not like on tours or anything, but the book is really ideal, and it was updated. They had earlier versions, but this one is quite up to date. So I wouldn't worry about attachments or anything, but you know, you can do visualization. Lloyd Auerbach, who's the top ghost investigator in the United States, he has people practice visualization of protection, like white light, or that they're in a kind of a globe of, and he says he doesn't do it or have them do it to protect themselves from other forces. He has them do it because it makes you more focused on the intention of what you're doing, if you're going to do psychic work or something like that. Yeah, just give it a try. You may pick up stuff, but you better be prepared to hear things.
It'll be a night of goosebumps. Like tonight, this has been a fascinating evening, and I've had goosebumps all over my body continuously. Thank you very much.
I'm from Brooklyn, and I am a skeptic. I don't trust people. I don't believe people. Mom says that I was just 4 years old, and she said, well, get dressed. We have to go Christmas shopping. And I said, why? Why are you spending money for stuff if you can just put it on a list and somebody brings it for free? Yeah. She said, oh, I've got a live one here. So I've always been like, you know, Judge Judy, do you ever see Judge Judy over there? She's a TV judge.
Unfortunately, yes, we do. Yes, unfortunately.
She's from the same neighborhood I'm from. I'm from the same neighborhood as Anthony Fauci, Chuck Schumer, Bernie Sanders, and...
You're in the wrong neighborhood.
You know, as Judge Judy says, don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining. And I'm the same way, you know, in this stuff. I'm very skeptical. If I tell you the story, that's exactly how it happened because my credibility is on the line. If you tell me a story, or if I hear your near-death experience got better every time you tell the story, you know, you're gone. So, but you know, I'll stand by this evidence, and you know, I'd like to do a lot more of this work. We're under lockdown now. I contacted a couple of places that should have been closed up, so I thought maybe I could stay there, but nobody's communicating. It is very exciting, and the real point of all this is that you know, the great fear is death. It doesn't exist. I like the analogy, when you got here, they gave you a brand new car, you banged it up, We'll just say banged as in collisions. We'll just, and all that. I mean, you know, you rode it until it became a jalopy. You left it off at the junkyard, and at that point you started flying. And that appears, even the research in reincarnation is very convincing, very powerful. So, you know, we don't have anything to fear, but knowing this, you are responsible for everything you do. At the end, there is an accounting. There's no judge except you. That's when you want to read the near-death accounts, when people had what was called the life review, where their very life passed before their eyes, which some people have in an accident or something. That may actually be the first stage of leaving your body, as you get to see who you really are and what you should have done and what you did do. And so, you know, why wait till the end? Avoid the rush and be nice now.
And Steve, I mean, with that, you actually have some stories or some evidence of some of the afterlife, or excuse me, near-death experiences. I've heard you discuss those cases before, so we may have you back sometime to talk about that as well. But,
well, the near-death literature is extensive. Everybody who's ever had a near-death experience seems to have written a book. There are certain phenomena that are consistent, but no person has ever had more than about 4 out of the 23 of them. I think what speaks best for the near-death experience are the people who come back. A few of them are entirely altruistic, where they were type A managerial types in the world. It was them versus the world. I know of one here in this area who did not want to come back, and he's very bitter because he's now seen what that is like, and he doesn't want to be here. And that's 30% of the people who have near-death experiences don't want to come back, and they're not happy about it. Others have DNRs because they like, you know, next time I go, let me go. I'm ready. I know what's waiting for me. I've not had a near-death experience. I'm not going to be a flatliner, those people who try to give themselves them, because I'm concerned about the far death experience. That's a phrase I coined. That's the one where you don't get to come back. I still have a few things to do here, so you know, after that I'm ready to go. But it's very powerful if you can persuade people to look at the literature while nothing is going wrong in their lives, because then later on, when they're getting closer to the end, they're prepared for it, and that's a beautiful thing, really. But I'll find something to come back and talk about. Don't worry.
Yeah, that'd be great. We'd love to have you back. But we've been going for a little over 3 hours, so I think it's about time we call it a night. But before we do that, I've had a couple of brothers actually sending messages on Facebook asking about my hat. So the hat is from Masonic Revival. So if you're interested, check them out. They have hats, shirts, they have everything, good quality stuff. Go check them out. But Worshipful Brother Steve, thank you so much again for being here tonight, for being our guest speaker. I've heard several of these recordings and EVPs before. You and I have sat in your library, and I've heard them, you know, just one-on-one, and they still just send chills down my spine. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. But fantastic.
It's what I tell people when they have a haunted house. I said, well, let's reframe this. You now have evidence that you're not going to die.
It's true. And
if, particularly if they're tenants, your lease will be up because you can't leave a house because it's haunted. But if you're tenants, that you will, you're going to have some nice stories to tell at the end of this. But I can tell you, the people who are living in a really haunted house, it's not fun. You're just tired of being startled all the time. And some of the stuff that happens is, it's annoying, startling. You can't have company. Can't get babysitters. That's a real problem. All right, everyone. Well, it's a pleasure to be able to do this. I'm just very grateful that I can share this stuff, because, this whole question, I think, about personal responsibility. This really brings it home. You know, if we don't die, then we're here for a reason, which means we're really responsible. And Masonry teaches that. You know, this is a probationary period. That's the probate means to test. We're being tested and proven. And so, you know, if we keep that in mind, what I tell people is when you're faced with a challenge, imagine at the end of your life, you're now looking back at this moment and you're going to see how you responded. Then respond now in the way that you will be most satisfied with then. Think about that. Because there is a record. So
absolutely,
it's much nicer to think that it doesn't matter, that the stuff you do when nobody's watching isn't going to matter. Well, guess what? All right, well, I guess I'll leave you folks. It's been 3 hours and 15 minutes. I've been standing this whole time.
Wow. And I'm sure the dog has to go out.
No, I emptied her before the storm. We had a wall of cold, we didn't have thunderstorms, but we had really, really heavy rain about 4 hours ago, started up. And so I made sure she was empty. So, because in the middle of this, and you start hearing, you know, the toenails and all that, she's doing the dance. And, you know, I would have to then take a break and take her out. But no, I made sure.
We're lucky. They had some hail up in Youngsville, in that area.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, but not us. So we got off. But anyway, I want to thank everyone for sticking with us tonight. This has probably been our longest presentation we've ever had, but the conversation has been absolutely fantastic. And I think that's a testament to the subject matter and the presentation. So Steve, thank you again. I'll look forward to seeing you probably tomorrow night.
Yeah, I don't know if you're interested, but State College will be meeting on the 21st of October in the airplane hangar in Johnston County. I have to find out how many brothers are going to be there and how much room we have so we can keep distance. But it would just be fun. I think that they'll probably move the helicopter and a couple of planes out so we have the space to ourselves. Otherwise, we'll have to kind of maneuver. But that'll be fun.
Ooh, I'm going to try to join you there. And just one last plug. We have Mitch Horowitz coming on October 28th. So, Steve, I know you'll want to tune into that. Mitch is going to be giving his presentation, Reclaiming the Damned, where he talks about, I mean, it's just in time for Halloween, where he's talking about a lot of these legends and myths like Bigfoot, UFOs, things like that, and the impact they have on our psyche, why there's such an important part of our culture and our just the human psyche. So I think that's going to be a fantastic presentation.
I have a quick Mitch Horowitz story, because when he came to speak at the Rhine, I got him to speak at the Scottish Rite Masonic Temple in Greensboro. And so I got to ride with him. But first time I met him at the Rhine, his book, Occult America, he signed my copy. And so he was visiting here again. And I asked him to sign the other books I bought of his. And I accidentally included the copy. I had another copy of Occult America, but I accidentally included the one he'd already signed. He signed it again. I had to leave them somewhere for him to sign. And then he sent me an email. He said, when you get the books, check the date. Opened it up. It was 7 years to the day from he had signed the book the first time to the second one. That was kind of we think that was significant. Anyway, he's a very informative speaker, well-versed, and really speaks beautifully. He speaks as he writes, and he writes very well. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yep, he's incredible.
Well, good night, everyone. Sleep well. And I included my email address in there, so if anybody needs to get in touch, then, don't hesitate. And I'll, send you more information in whatever area, because I do know quite a bit of the literature. I've got a pretty big library. Still trying to figure it all out. I figured I would have it all worked out, but it turns out to be more complicated than I thought.
Thank you, Stephen. It's great to have someone from Brooklyn as
Brooklyn,
me in the show.
By the way, I use my Brooklyn accent when I want to get somebody to behave a certain way and they don't know me. Just say, look, what are you doing? You're going to pick up all them damn feathers and you're going to sit there and be quiet. You understand? They're like, it is the best accent to have.
It is.
All right, well, everyone, have a
Good
great night, and we will see you next week when Piers Vaughn will be our guest, and Piers will be talking about the Enochian language. I mean, that's an incredible presentation. I think, Renee, you've probably seen that before, but...
Oh, I love Piers. Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah. But absolutely incredible. So he will be here next Tuesday at 8 p.m., so be sure to register for that. I should have the link up a little later this week. Let's see, today's Tuesday. Yeah, I'll have it up before the end of the week. So be sure to check that out, and I hope everyone has a great night.